Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 281. Increasing the difficulty. Seth. Are you okay? Mina took off her mask and stood beside him. Oh. Yeah. Why do you ask? You seem to be brooding about something. It's about Puffles. Puffles? Mina asked, surprised. Seeing all these people and parties with their pets, it's already been over 3 months, Mina, he said, depressed. The eye-visor had not spoken to him ever since he closed up. Seth was worried. I know you are worried. But he's Puffles the Mighty, the great eye-visor. I bet he will come back as if nothing happened and make fun of you for worrying. You are probably right. I should believe in him, he said with a smile. Look, the second round is starting. Oh God, are they serious? James blocked the strike of a heavy war axe with his shield and almost lost his footing. The second round had a tremendous increase in difficulty. The first mob to appear were the last ones from the last round. A team of hobgoblins had appeared before them. Although their power was greater, the couple could manage with room to spare. What came after them was the real challenge. A pair of orcs. An orc warrior and an orc shaman. The over 2-meter-tall humanoid were hulking mountains of muscle. Even the shaman had more muscle than a bodybuilder. The biggest problem was that orcs were not simply monsters. They had a human level of intellect coupled with several times the power, which made the fight a lot harder. I am Ir Grash, warrior of the Wolverine tribe. Be honored to become a sacrifice to my axe, the green he-man hollered in a flurry of strikes. James could compete with the orc thanks to the level difference, but this didn't hold up for long. The shaman in the back kept throwing hexes at him and Jess. He could feel his strength weaken and his body slowing down before he got the notification of the status effects. Can you manage, Jamie? I might need a little longer to cast. Jess pressed out of her lips from behind him. He only nodded and used his armor's effects to counter the shaman's debuff and keep exchanging blows with Ir Grash. Finally, Jess finished casting her spell and shot a fire lance at the orc warrior. With a snort, the warrior dodged, caused the lance to pass by him and hitting the shaman in the back in the kidneys. With an ear-shattering explosion and a pitiful scream, the lance exploded and ripped off the left side of the chanting shaman's abdomen. Burst and scrambled intestines could be seen in the wound as the shaman fall to the ground. Seeing his comrade fall because of his blunder enraged the orc warrior. The hits of his weapon numbed James's arm and he could only desperately try to block the attack and keep the orc away from his partner. He tried his best, but when the orc barely dodged a fireball coming for its head, he lost the aggro. Ir Grash diverted his sword and shoved the human away as he stormed at the mage girl. James used a quick slash from behind, aiming for the orc's calves and missing tragically. The mage girl didn't stop chanting, even when the orc's oversized axe came down at Jess's face. The blade was blocked just inches away from her face. On her shoulder sat a small blue owl with ember eyes and a golden marking around its eyes looking like glasses. She had trusted this little fella, her pet Eustace. Jess finished her chant and another fire lance shot at Ir Grash, this time at point-blank range. The warrior pulled the white axe blade before his chest in an attempt to block the magic. In an explosion of fire and smoke, the lump of muscle was catapulted away while Jess staggered back and fell on her butt. She looked at the cloud of dust and smoke where the orc had landed, but she could hear angry grunts and screams from within. It was not enough to end the orc warrior once and for all. He had raised himself. The axe blade had molten and he only held a handle with scrap metal at the end. The muscular chest was covered in burns and blisters, but the orc still stood strong. The strike had ended his rage and he tried to calmly judge the situation. The shaman had died and turned into particles. The mage was getting back on her feet and staring at him in shock. The warrior. A sharp pain assaulted him and he saw a long sword blade emerge from his left chesticle. There was the warrior. Behind him. He heard his own skull crunch when the attacker smashed his shield into the back of his head. Ir Grash fell to knees as the sword was pulled out of his chest. Blood spurted from the wound and the orc had a hard time catching a thought. Ir Grash has lost. The orc fell limp after muttering this. Moments later they got the kill notification and he started turning into particles like any corpse left in a dungeon. They sighed a breath of relief. This was a huge jump in difficulty. Jess was even forced to summon her pet against mobs almost 5 levels lower than them. Like in the previous rounds, they were given a short break they could use to prepare for the next spawn. Jess chugged a mana potion while James had a stamina potion and half a water bottle. A siren notified them that their next spawn was about to happen. The couple got in formation and awaited their next opponents. Jess already started chanting a fire lance to greet whatever was coming out of the portal. The orc pair had really ruffled their nerves and brought their head back in the game. Immediately after the portal opened and a humanoid figure stepped out, the fire lance was launched at the creature. Instead of an explosion of fire and smoke, the lance puffed out of existence when it hit the humanoid. The portal closed and they got a good look at their opponents. Dragon newts. Shit. Jess cursed like a sailor behind James. The two figures were covered in orange scales and elaborate leather armor. Their faces were more humanoid than those of lizardmen but resembled a cute newt more than a lizard. These people were allegedly related to dragons like dragonoids, but a lot more distant. James also wasn't happy about this development. Dragon newts were comparable to orcs in physical strength, but they came with high magic resistance. Especially against fire magic, Jess's forte as a fire mage. He had to prepare to carry this fight. When he wanted to drink a buff potion but was interrupted by one of the newts charging at him. It wielded a quick rapier he managed to evade in the last moment. Behind the amphibian fencer, his companion already started chanting a spell. On top of being resistant to magic, they were even good at using it themselves. What an unfair race! He had not much time to spare for the caster as the fencer kept him occupied. At least the passive taunt skill seemed to work, as both focused on him. The caster shouted a signal and the fencer suddenly distanced himself. A huge fireball had formed between the hands of the dragon newt and he was about to fire it when he was hit in the face by a water ball. Jess had waited for this moment. Although these low-level spells did no damage, they were quick to cast and it was enough to disrupt the attack. The fireball was diverted and James was able to evade the spell in the nick of time. Eustace, the little lapis owl, shot an ice pike at the fencer, giving James the chance to land a hit when he evaded the magic. A deep, heavily bleeding gash now impeded the fencer's movement while the caster put his attention on Jess. James didn't have the time to use a skill to gain his aggro and was forced to reveal another card up their sleeve. An armor wolf, James's pet, attacked the caster, getting his attention. The wolf had a great defense and would be able to take a few hits. In the meantime, Jess and Eustace worked with James to take down the weakened fencer. 3-on-1 the fencer had no chance and succumbed soon. His wolf had suffered quite some damage and James unsummoned his wolf to save it from further harm. And this concludes the first day of our event, the announcer said after the last fight of this round ended. Jess and James had successfully finished their fight and watched others fail or succeed. They were in a good mood right now. They could take a break the next day and only had to enter the third round tomorrow evening. The first round had already eliminated many competitors and judging by how many others got through this part of the second round, there would probably be no more than 150 others on the third day. Their chances were good. Chapter 282. Third round. James and Jess were up again on the evening of the second day. James had tried to get his original sword back, but the smith told him that it would probably take until after the tournament to repair. The warrior gladly kept the better substitute for the third round. They had watched the second round and as they had suspected, there were less than 150 people who made it to the third round. Their chances to get into the top 50 were good. Maybe they could aim even higher? These notions quickly ended with the start of the third round. The first monsters they faced were two trolls and they could barely put up a fight against the two creatures with brute strength and even stronger healing factor. In the end, they only won because Jess could spam fire spells onto the creatures and inflict burn. As if to make fun of their suffering, the monsters that appeared next were ogres. Two of them. The beasts standing over 3 meters in height wielded almost as long clubs, fashioned from small, uprooted trees. Their stench immediately filled the field and made the mage girl gag. Even James grimaced. They were huge, had high defense, tremendous strength, and a terrifying stench. Fighting these giants took their all, but in the end, they had to give up on the fight and flee the field. Now it came down to how everyone else would fare during the third day. Their spirits were down. The only silver streak was that they were among the last people to fight in this group. Maybe they could still get in the top 50. They were about to leave when a figure in a black suit and a silver lion mask stepped in their way. "Hello, I am a scout from Minas March. Would you guys please accompany me? There is someone who wants to meet you." So they were right. These were the people of Minas March. Jess and James had somewhat given up on actually being scouted and had put their hopes on the prizes. Encountering this chance made their hearts race. They eagerly followed the lion-masked person to a private booth where they met the blacksmith. James realized that they probably were just supposed to give back the borrowed sword. He took out the sheathed sword from his inventory. Oh. Oh, I guess we misunderstood. Here is the sword we borrowed. Can I collect my sword after the tournament? PFF. Ha ha ha, the blacksmith laughed. Even the scout behind them snickered. Jess gave him a harsh elbow check to the ribs. What are you doing? Look at the situation. The blacksmith was wearing a tailored suit and leisurely sat on the luxurious couch with a glass of alcohol in his hand. I am Seth, the Tower Master of Minas March. I asked you to come here to talk with you about becoming part of the Oath Guard. The Tower Master is a blacksmith. James blurted and got another painful poke from his partner. We can really become part of this Oath Guard. Yes. And we each get a full suit of epic-rated equipment. More or less, yes. We lack epic robes for casters at the moment. I still have to talk with Nico Booz about this. Seth admitted a little embarrassed. But he will get a full suit of epic armor. Yes, and you will get at least accessories and a leather armor for the meantime. Deal. Jess decided for the two of them. Great. But are you sure? Do you want some more days to think about it, or should we finalize it immediately? Immediately, the woman said decisively. Mary brought the magic contracts. Jess signed immediately and then bullied James into it. Here are your rings. When the tournament is over, visit the system church and teleport to Minas March. Then you will get your equipment and a place to stay. The two looked a little perplexed but took the 2 silver rings with big eyes. Are you sure about those two? You saw him still trying to return the sword. I really like them. The great me doesn't. They are too generic to hang out with us. Puffles. Fudge roll. Fudge roll. It is I, Fudge Puffles the Great. I have awoken. Does that mean you are finally done? No, I still need some time, but I am conscious. A heavy weight fell off Seth's heart. He had often thought of Puffles during the last months. He wouldn't admit that he missed the caterpillar, but he did miss him. Just what would Puffles look like when he could finally come out? Is it really Puffles? Mina asked later that evening. Yeah, he didn't stop talking ever since he woke up. I'm glad for you. She said with a smile. Seth had spent a lot of time getting Puffles up to date on what happened lately before the eye-visor had finally fallen silent again. The caterpillar got really hyped about getting to watch the rest of the tournament. On the other hand, Puffles had told him about the changes in him. He had now reached the adult phase of an eye-visor. This meant he would only grow from now on, but not pupate anymore. This meant that Seth did not have to fear the caterpillar suddenly closing up. And Puffles could now produce a new thread. Seth was excited to see what it could do. Puffles waking up was the best message in the last 3 months. Except maybe the cloak he got from Nadal and being able to keep the stuff from his class quest. He slept well tonight. The third and final day of the first part of the tournament. After the third round, there were only 32 participants left. Nobody got past the fourth round. The creatures appearing in the fourth round were ice trolls, woodland giants, and a drake. All of them were monsters that were hard to face even to people around level 40. Although there were monsters prepared up to level 40, thanks to the kind of monsters prepared, nobody got past these at LV33. At the end of the day, Jess and James got lucky. On top of being scouted for the Oath Guard, they also got 47th place and a coupon for the Turquoise Anvil. Not only that, most of the participants of the tournament were nameless adventurers. They had gotten a stage to show their worth. Especially the TOP-10 gained a lot of fame and popularity in Delta. The third round ended in a big award ceremony where the TOP-25 got their prizes. Everything else was done behind the scenes. Like Jess and James, various participants had been approached by the Lords of Minas Mar wearing the masks Seth and Cerberus had whipped up in the days leading up to the event. Like Jonah's mask, they were made from bones of Seth. Unlike Jonah's mask, those of the others were only rare and meant for public occasions. This was they could appear as the Lords of Minas Mar, without being connected to the field service parties. It was mostly Cerberus playing a big part in mass-producing these masks. Seth chose those with passable effects and refined them. The only feature all of them had in common was a durability of 5000 and their feature to interact with the rings. With this end the first part of Delta's Great Tournament. But don't forget, tomorrow start the PvP tournament. We have a lot of well-known names among the participants for tomorrow. You can look forward to the Master of the Volcano Guild, Marcel, the terrifying Ice Queen of the Mountain Guild, Elsa, and many others. Even the self-proclaimed Adventurer King has registered. Will he be able to prove his claims in the next 3 days? As candidates for the TOP50 and members of the Oath Guard in name, Jess and James could enjoy the third and fourth round as VIP audience in the private booth they had visited the other day. Didn't we meet the Adventurer King on the first day? What did he do here if he take part in the PvP tournament? Jess muttered to James. It was Mary that leaned forward and answered her question with a mysterious smile. I'm sorry that you had to endure his presence. We had to allow him to participate because it became a public event. Instead, we pulled a few little pranks on him. Ho ho ho, she snickered with her hand covering her mouth. The two made a mental note not to offend anyone. Especially not the administration. Mary had explained to them the structure of Mina's march. It came as a surprise that they were able to technically talk to some of the highest members of their guild on their first day. It was intimidating at first, but it was also a chance. They were joining right after the foundation of Mina's march. They had the chance to become friendly with the big decision makers. It was the chance to not just stay a foot soldier in a big organization but also gain a higher position as it grew. After the third day ended, the two returned home. It was a small flat at the outskirts of Delta. It was not nice or cozy, but cheap. They spent a lot of time in the dungeons, so they didn't need anything better. They stuffed all their luggage into their inventory. They had all the time to ask questions to the members of the lords and knew what to do. They came to the church and asked for a priest called Simon. Soon a voluminous and grumpy priest with a big white beard appeared from the staircase. Really? I know I offered it, but why are all of them asking for me personally? He kept muttering to himself under heavy panting. Is it you two? New members of the Oath Guard? Follow me. They followed the priest into a big room with a formation on the ground. Simon looked into his inventory for a moment before he retrieved the formation permit. Here, with this, you can enter and leave this room whenever you want. You can also ask a staff member to lead you to this room. I fathom you know how to get to Mina's Mar? Yes? Good. Farewell then. He left the two alone and returned to whatever the duty of a system priest was. The two equipped the rings they were given and stepped into the teleportation formation. Chapter 283. Somewhere else, 5. The messenger of Arjit Noor has arrived, the subordinate reported to the princess. Lena had set off from Delta about 2 months ago to investigate and eradicate the followers of Zarkan. These Zarkists had recently encroached on the Empire's authority and attacked citizens. In their preliminary research, they found that Arjit Noor, the Empire of Undead led by their immortal God King, had already been waging war with the Zarkists for a while now and had managed to push them out of Gamma. Unfortunately, they did the same with living people. The Krana Empire had met the undead on many worlds. Sometimes they fought and sometimes they would make a deal. The princess hoped to achieve the latter. Lena wanted to work with them to bring the refugees under the protection of the Krana Empire. The people fleeing from the undead were easy picking for the expanding Zarkists. Arjit Noor also had a vested interest in not strengthening this almost banished enemy. Soon her subordinate came back with the messenger of Arjit Noor. It was a burly dark elf with one milky white eye. His face and visible skin were covered in dark ugly scars. According to their information, this was the only general that managed to return from the Empire's northern expedition to Earth. He had gained a high position among the forces of Arjit Noor on Earth. It was a positive sign that they sent someone like this. Greeting, Princess Lena, the general said seriously and bowed to her. Greetings, General. Please relax. We are far from any courtrooms here. The elf nodded and they started their negotiations. The Empire guaranteed not to get involved in whatever Arjit Noor was doing in Gamma. In exchange, the undead would grant the living people that did not want to stay safe conduct from Gamma. The Krana Empire would shelter the refugees and protect them. Lena sighed once she was alone in her tent. She missed Finn and Delta. There was nothing here she could use to distract herself from her work. It was especially hard as the situation was so depressing. The people left in Gamma were desperate. The rise of the Zarkists had destroyed whatever structure they had managed to build. Since then they were plagued by invaders, undead, Zarkists, and dungeon breaks. These people were at their wits' end, low-level, and starving. They even opted to summon a starter village to this place to facilitate their efforts. As for the followers of Zarkan, they were a hard nut to crack. They only needed to infect someone to increase their numbers and they somehow managed to act decentralized. It was as if they were led by a hive mind. On top of that, they were hard to kill. High-ranking priests needed to seal their souls or they would simply regenerate even if they were turned to dust. At least they were rather weak overall. Another agreement was to forge a united front against the Zarkists. With Arjit Noer's necromancers to bolster their ranks, it would become easier to ensure their enemies' death and hinder their resurrection. It was surprisingly easy to persuade the Dark Elf of this plan. He immediately agreed when they said that they would take down the Zarkists and the undead only needed to make sure they stayed dead. The princess suspected that there was something to gain for these necromancers, but it was impossible for her to understand these nutcases. She also didn't care. Both sides got what they wanted. That was all that mattered. Once they set up a starter village here, they could simply teleport these people to Delta. The princess was sure that there would be more Orihumas joining the empire in this way. They just needed to get them to safety. No man's land. She had finally managed to return. The ruins of old once again laid before her. She had used the time in Y City well. The city had slightly changed after the last time she had visited. The level of the adventurers had made a jump. It seemed that there were more and better weapons on the market. They were expensive, but it seemed like a steady improvement. Although being among people made her uncomfortable because of her inherent needs, she was able to grow a lot in the almost untouched high-level dungeons. She also got the chance to choose a second class, but there was none among those she could choose that she liked. Most of them went in a quite unsavory direction like Corpse Eater that would allow her to gain skills and proficiency from players she ate. Others were not much better. It was mostly about eating people, drinking blood, feasting on fear or souls. She would prefer something that got rid of the need to eat human flesh. All she could do was pull herself together and hide in the dungeons. At first, she had only concentrated on the close-quarter abilities of her class and she fared well with them in the wilderness. She had become very proficient with transforming different parts of her body to increase her damage or defense. Turning her hand into claws or her skin into scales already came to her on instinct. It was harder in the dungeons when big groups of monsters sieged her. The circumstances forced her to become better with her other skills. At first, it was the smaller magics like heat aura or camouflage she could easily integrate into her original strategy. After weeks she also got used to mixing illusion into her fighting style. When her skills grew and she could ensnare mobs on her own level, raiding dungeons became easy. She could dive among monster hordes completely unnoticed and slaughter them from within while they fought each other or simply didn't defend themselves. Even monsters above her level could be influenced by her illusions and ease the harder fights. She died several times but it didn't stop her. The Rakshasa continued until she got the hang of this fighting style. Why did she try so hard to gain strength? For a long while, her mind was clouded. Zarkin had not just killed her family. The god caused her to kill her family with her own hands. She wanted revenge, but also to help people so they could help her. When the people she protected betrayed her, it would be a lie to say she didn't want to kill them all. Kill everyone and everything. All those vermin that had kicked her goodwill. That had mocked her efforts and took everything from her. It was a cold, smoldering rage. This had changed. The beating she had received cleared her head. What was the point in ridding the world of these people, when she herself could be squashed like an ant on someone else's whim? She needed strength. Strength was freedom. Once she was strong enough nobody would be able to take anything from her. And could do whatever she wanted. When she reached level 60 she unlocked another skill tree. Conjuration. She could summon familiars and subordinates at the later stages. Her conjuring was different from the familiar summoning of Evie. She summoned a random creature and could make it obey her commands. She could also make a familiar contract with intelligent ones. But what came out was too weak for her taste. These creatures would not be a help if they died too easily. In the end, she contracted a djinn. It could face her in melee combat and had several kinds of mysterious magic powers. It was also intelligent like a human being. It helped to lessen her loneliness. With this companion, she felt ready to return to this place and try to find out who this person even was. Before that, she decided to suit up. Y City had changed a lot during her stay. The most obvious change was the introduction of a public transportation system based on buses running with magic. The average level of the people had increased and dungeon breaks had become more uncommon. The biggest breakthrough was that technicians had managed to create a field generator that stopped gates from being formed. She only noticed these things in passing but was not really interested in them. What caught her eyes was the new kind of equipment that had flooded the market. Super alloy weapons and polyarcanet armors. They could be bought with system gold which saved her the hassle of exchanging it for credits. They looked quite generic like science fiction plastic armors and lacked options like the dungeon items, but their performance was over the top. The stats were far above the uncommon stuff found on the market and comparable to rare equipment. She had collected a lot of gold, so they seemed cheap to her. She decked herself in this new gear and set off. Have the preparations been finished? Yes, Lord Chancellor. Good. These heretics are at least good for something. Even if it is just menial labor. Yes, my lord. Chapter 284. PvP Tournament. Hello. Are you new members of the Oath Guard? A young woman with bright blue hair greeted them as they appeared in a wide open room with marble floors. Yes. We were told to come here. Jess answered excitedly. She and James had broken all bridges behind them and were looking forward to their new workplace. Great. I'm Evie. Follow me, I will show you your accommodations. The couple followed the young girl along luxurious corridors and down a wide regal spiral staircase. Slack-jawed the two simply followed, their eyes big with wonder. It was as if they entered some antique mansion or a palace. I'm a witch working in the alchemist laboratories. My hair's turned blue when a potion went wrong. Evie suddenly explained when she noticed Jess's gaze. The magician had marveled at the mysterious blue and was a little jealous. Wow, do you think you could do the same with red? She asked interestedly. She had always been bored by her normal brown hair. But dyeing one's hair was a pain, especially since the world went downhill. The woman laughed with an innocent smile. I will try. Maybe we could sell it as hair dye at the shop, she mused. Jess was nodding enthusiastically. James couldn't really follow their conversation and concentrated on their surroundings. They entered the wide entrance hall and came to a halt. The place you arrived at was the greeting room for newcomers. In the future, you can teleport to Delta from the entrance hall, and you will also arrive here when you return. Make sure to wear your rings at all times. It's the only thing that stops the tower's traps from activating. A cold shower ran down their backs. Traps? Nothing here looked like anything but an overly decorated palace. Hearing that there were traps here shocked them. Evie left through the big gate and the two followed. There was a wide stair leading down to a plaza. A weak but consistent light allowed them to see a giant cavern. Behind the plaza was a gorge with a beautiful bridge crossing it. Looking back, they saw the facade of a giant tower that was half merged into the rock wall. It was like an iceberg with just a small piece of the tower and its wide base being visible from the outside. It's just over the bridge, she said and led them across the bottomless gorge. Is this safe? James muttered unsurely. It's completely safe, as long as you wear your rings, Evie answered with a mischievous smile. Past the bridge appeared a gatehouse built into the walls of the cavern. It guarded a wide tunnel with enough space for two cars to pass each other. Warm lights that imitated daylight illuminated the place. This is the gatehouse. It functions as gatehouse, guardhouse, and the barracks of the Oath Guard. Jess and James were led inside. The interior was not as luxurious as the tower, but it was to be expected from a militaristic building. But the barracks surprised them. They got a full apartment with a living room, bedroom, bathroom, and a small kitchen. This was several times better than their old place. If you don't like cooking, there is also a cafeteria with a chef where you can go to eat. After showing them around the place, Evie explained their duties and the peculiarities of the Oath armor. Their main task would be to work as part of the field service and farm materials for the crafters in the tower. Or to guard this main entrance to Minas Mar from possible invaders. The latter was just in case anything really ever happened. Finally, they entered the armory of the guardhouse. Rows and rows of plate, chain mail, and leather armor on racks filled the room. Another room was filled with just as many weapons of all kinds. Choose your gear. They are all labeled so you know their effects. Delta. It was time for the duels. The participants of the PvP event were assembled in the arena. They were split into two groups. The party fights and the single duels. The party tournament would be held first with the single duels as the final event. This was possible thanks to the lower number of participants above Leave 35. Anyone interesting among them? Seth asked Mike as he returned to the private booth. They are all not bad but... well, the gems already belong to others or have already built their own nest. The interesting ones only took part for the prizes. On my side, too. Although their pride is somewhat justified, they are mostly lacking or taken. Especially this self-proclaimed king is a pain in the ass. There were 32 parties participating. Following traditional tournament style, parties of 5 fought and the winner would proceed to the next round. The makeshift and lower-level parties were instantly eliminated within the first round, leaving only those with actual power like the ones from stronger guilds. Unfortunately, this included the Adventurer King. His personality was trash, but his skills were not. With his party of lackeys behind him, he was a hard nut to crack. Even in the second round when his party met the leading of a famous guild called the Northwind Brigade, they somehow managed to defeat the guild master and her party. Seth grew maced. In the party section was only one prize. Each party member of the winning party would be able to request one epic item. Even if he could be mean and give them one of the rejects made from bones of Seth, he really didn't want to give them anything. It wasn't just the leader, his cronies also had a terrible personality, and they were bad winners through and through. They didn't just curse their opponents, but even killed after the other surrendered. The participants could revive as if they died in a dungeon, but it was still death. Humiliation and a loss of experience were not nice either. The party of scumbags made it up to the semifinals where Marcel, the leader of the Volcano Guild, finally made them bow their head with the power of teamwork and superior equipment. The leader of scumbags showed a terrifying strength but could not fight back once the rest of his party fell one by one. On that note, Elsa, the Ice Queen of the Mountain Guild, was defeated by Brock of the Boulder Guild. Marcel and Brock met in the final. Watching these parties fight gave Seth inspiration for a poem he called The Song of Fire and Earth. It was the fight of the two vanguards, Marcel and Brock, a magic swordsman focused on fire and an earth, something Seth would call an elemental monk. Brock fought like an earthbender, moving the earth at his will and summoning mounds, boulders, and spikes while fighting in close quarters with the enemy guild master. The final winner was the Boulder Guild, and Seth had no problem with handing over some of his better practice pieces to Brock and his people. Second place, the Volcano Guild, each member got a coupon to choose a free rare weapon at the Turquoise Anvil. And so, the party tournament ended on the evening of the first day. Although some of the fights were thrilling, this part resembled more of a break-in between the highlights. It was a good advertisement for the smaller and bigger guild to get their name known. Next would be the single duels between adventurers. The participants were more numerous, and there were even some famous adventurers that had come from the outside. There were not just people stationed in Delta, but even other worlders had joined to get their hands on the fame and an epic item. Chapter 285. Champion of Vitsliputsli. Second to last day. The single PvP tournament had a whopping 500 plus participants registered. Just like the party event, they would go through a traditional tournament. The many fields in the stadium had been turned into 50 arenas. On the first day, we will cull the herd and reduce the numbers to 64 combatants in the first 5 rounds of the tournament. These warriors will proceed to the great finale on the 6th and last day of this great event, the announcer explained excitedly. The first day was the hardest for the field service of Minas Mar, as they had to take a look at all the people that looked promising. Not so much for Seth. Since there were a lot fewer participants than in the PvE part, his was work less than before. Within only a few rounds the TOP-64 became more or less clear. Among them were many famous adventurers and guild leaders who already played a role in the last part. But it was the other worlders like beast people and demons that were the true eye-catcher. Their exotic skills and abilities marveled the audience, and they managed to take out the one or other audience favorite. The Adventurer King literally plowed through his opponents with a brilliant succession of one-hit knockouts. His fighting style was that of a monk or a martial artist based around a kind of claw weapon that mimicked jaguar claws. In a similar fashion, the favorites of the big guilds like the Ice Queen of the Mountain Guild, Elsa, Master of the Volcano Guild, Marcel, and Master of the Boulder Guild, Brock, were making their ways to the TOP-64. Other notable combatants included a demon that could turn into mist like in a vampire myth and became immune to physical damage and most magic, and a valiant tiger Tyajat. The cat warrior was not part of Drosie's caravan, but a sole wanderer. Not much changed for these people up until the quarterfinals. They were head and shoulders above the others of the TOP-64. The last 16 duels were held one at a time on a big stage in the center, as these were the strongest and most promising combatants. In this round was 2 of these frontrunners finally crashed into each other. The Tiger Warrior and Brock, the earth-bending monk, met in a phenomenal clash of brute force. Neither held back and went 100% from the start. With a massive roar, the tiger went into his frenzy state and grew to over 2 meters. A tank of bulging muscle covered in robust orange-red fur and armor barreled towards the monk. The monk reciprocated the tiger's challenge. Although smaller than the beast person, his muscles bulged as he buffed himself and exploded the flimsy robe off his body. A monk didn't need armor, his steeled muscles glinted in the sun as his lion roar shook the stadium. Tiger claws and iron fists met in the middle of the arena as the two shot at each other. For the first few minutes of their exchange, there was almost no visible difference in their performance. But soon wounds started to creep up. The monk's prided muscles of steel kept taking damage from the tiger's sharp claws while his own fist strikes could ultimately not penetrate the armor and fur to deal decisive damage. Brock was not stupid. He wouldn't hold back just to meet his opponent on even ground. Arath spikes started shooting at the tiger as the guild master used a shell of stone to defend against the tiger's attacks. This was another twist in the fight as the tiger was now forced into the defense. The earthen spike, rock shots, and traps the monk kept using made it hard to evade while the fists of iron kept showering him. It was the Tijas's turn to take damage as his eyes grew redder and redder from rage and annoyance. The honest and forthright-seeming monk was much craftier than expected. The decisive change was when the tigerman crossed the limit. He jumped back and started to transform again, but he didn't turn back and become smaller. He became bigger. Suddenly Brock was faced with a 3-meter-tall, ferocious tiger. He was petrified for a moment by the deep tiger eyes. The monk had not much time to think. Everything ended in a blink when the tiger suddenly vanished only to appear behind Brock and break his neck in a single bite. Everything went black for the winner of the party event as he fell to the ground lifeless. While Brock disintegrated to be revived at the guild station, the tiger slowly turned back. The beast person stood there half naked and heavily breathing as he was announced the winner. Cheers rained on the tired cat as he limped out of the arena to recover. His opponent in the quarterfinals, a magician specialized in barriers, immediately admitted defeat as he didn't wish to face the tiger. In the quarterfinals, another two of the favorites clashed. The Mist Demon and the Adventurer King met in the ring. At first, it looked like the latter had no chance. His physical attacks and skills could not even touch the mist while the marks of invisible claws kept building up on his armor and exposed muscle. They bled, but were too shallow to deal severe damage. What they did was enrage the prideful hunk. The taunts and jeers of the Mist Demon didn't help to calm the arrogant fellow. His eyes started glowing in a bright yellow flame. You asked for this. I wanted to set the stage and unveil it during my win in the final, but now you will feel the wrath of God. Eruption. Bright light suddenly filled the stadium as the arena was covered in a flash of light and heat. It was as if the sun had descended into the ring. When it finally receded and people were again able to see what was going on, there was only the Adventurer King left standing in the ring. His exposed skin had healed and bright golden runes covered his skin. His eyes were golden holes with yellow flames licking up. On the ground laid the charred body of the Mist Demon. The sun flare had covered the whole arena and forced it to turn back or be completely obliterated. I am the champion of Vitzliputzli, warrior god of the sun, he announced proudly, and the golden runes and flame finally dimmed. He stayed in the arena with a smug face even after he was declared the winner of the match. He looked around for his applause, but the cheers were rather reserved. He was already known from the party tournament and people had gotten an idea about his terrible personality. That kind of person being chosen by a god was more worrying than exciting to most. Displeased, the showman left the stage. The last four left in the semifinals were Marcel, Elsa, the Adventurer King and the Tiger Thiajat. Before the last two rounds, the participants were given a good break while a live performance was played for the audience. Seth entered the break room of Dohu, the tiger. Who are you? Dohu asked grumpily, looking at the person who had just entered his private space. Hello. I'm Seth from Mina's March. You could say I am one of the organizers of this tournament. And what do you want, Mr. Organizer? The tiger asked, slightly exposing his teeth. He knew these kinds of situations. These blood-sucking vermin would come and ask him to fake defeat for the bets or for their pitiful human pride. He was so fed up with. I came to ask whether you know a Tijan named Drosy? He's a caravan leader. Seth asked, ignoring the tiger's antics. Seth knew that the caravans of the cat people kept contact, but he didn't know whether a soul wanderer like Dohu would know of Drosy's whereabouts. You know Uncle Drosy? What do you want from him? The tiger asked with a surprised face. I met him a few months ago and we traveled together to Delta. We kept in contact after he left, but I didn't hear from him for 2 months now. It's just that I'm a little worried. They got into a conversation and Seth explained how they met and what had happened during their journey. They ended up talking about Drosy and subsequently Dohu. Drosy was not his uncle by blood. But the cat elder had taken care of him and was a father figure to him since his childhood. 2 months, you say? Dohu pondered. It's really unlike Uncle Drosy. He wouldn't break contact without reason. I will have to write some letters after the tournament. I will check if someone else got a message from Uncle. If nobody did, we may have reason to worry. The announcement of the beginning of the semifinals ended their conversation. Seth left the tiger with mixed feelings. He was glad that he was able to speak amicably with Duhu, but he was worried about Drosy and the caravan. Chapter 286. Surprising Finale. A big applause for our 4 semi-finalists. Marcel, the magic swordsman of the Volcano Guild. Elsa, the Ice Queen of the Mountain Guild. Duhu, the ferocious Tigerman. And Derogue, the self-proclaimed Adventurer King. The 4 semi-finalists entered the arena under the roaring cheers of the audience. On the big screen around the arena, their matchup was decided like on a slot machine. And we have our matchups. In our first fight, the ice magician Elsa must deal with the explosive power of Duhu. Will the tiger freeze or can he break the ice? And in our second match, Marcel will fight Derogue. Fire versus fire. Who will have a burnout first? If I may ask Marcel and Derogue to leave the arena now so that the first match can begin. Once the two had left the arena, the Ice Queen and the tiger stood alone. Facing each other they waited for the judge to announce the start of the fight. As Duhu transformed into his frenzy mode, the whole arena was covered with ice in the blink of an eye. Elsa was not called the Ice Queen for nothing, and ice crystals already started to form in the tiger's fur before he even had a chance to move. With a tremendous roar, Duhu released his power in an energy blast that blew away the frost surrounding him. He smashed his fists together and chanted something, after which a red aura enveloped his body and protected him from the cold. He wanted to charge at the magician but had to evade several icicles shooting down from above. She didn't just cast her magic quick, but also chantless. Rows and rows of cold spikes kept the tiger at bay and hindered him from drawing closer. Duhu growled in frustration, decided to charge through. He accepted some damage to break through the Ice Queen's defense. With a massive speed boost, he shot past all the spikes and icicles, leaving a trail of red aura. Some managed to hit him, but most ended up being too slow or too fast to strike the furry giant. He simply rammed through those in his way. A moment later his powerful fist descended onto the surprised Elsa but was barely stopped by a thick ice shield. The shield was broken below his fist, but Elsa was still unharmed. His charge was not without cost. Blood seeped from the many smaller and bigger wounds where his skin was exposed, or the armor was pierced. The ice shield was so hard that the skin on his knuckles had split open and was bleeding, too. Still, the petite female was now directly facing the wrath of the beast. With over 2.5 meters, Duhu towered over the woman with over a meter in height. But before he could strike down the caster, she had already finished a sequence of hand signs and blinked away. With a smirk, she stood at the opposite end of the arena. She finished a chant sequence. The tiger had actually stepped into her trap. Duhu was surrounded by walls of ice and above his head had formed a giant iceberg that fell down like a frozen meteor. There was no way he could escape in time, everyone thought at this moment. The ice meteor crashed onto the arena and filled it with a cloud of snow, dust, ice boulders, and splinters. When everyone thought it was over, a brilliant shine of golden eyes pierced the frosty mist and petrified every spectator. "I give up," the Ice Queen pressed out between her clamped lips. Her eyes were pressed shut and she could not move her body even for a twitch. She noticed with surprise that she was still alive. When she opened her eyes, her heart fell as she saw how close she had been to death. Huge, pearly white claws as big as scythes had stopped just centimeters away from the woman's fair face. Had the paw the size of a big manhole cover not stopped in its track, it would have cut her into ribbons. Her eyes followed the paw back to a gigantic tiger. At least 5 meters tall, even bigger than in the previous fight. Its golden eyes fixated her with human intelligence, prompting her to repeat what she had just said. I admit defeat," she repeated loud and audibly with a slight stutter. The tiger nodded in satisfaction and slowly turned back into the tall Duhu. The tiger had a hard time steadying his breath but smiled. The judge officially announced the winner, and the stadium broke out into cheers. What an exciting performance by both participants. I'm sure nobody will forget this fight anytime soon. But there is more to come. We will take a short break while our technicians repair the arena. Are you okay? Seth entered Duhu's break room. The tiger was slumped into a corner and still breathing heavily. It's okay. I will recover in time. Geez. You Tijat are really stubborn. Here, try this. It's a high-quality recovery potion. Seth lent him a rare potion made by Evie. Its effects were quick and powerful. The only drawback was that the usage was limited to 1 a day. A second one would simply have no effect. The tiger was a little suspicious, but he recovered at a visible speed once he drank the potion. Why are you helping me? Well, I like you. You call a friend of mine uncle, and to be honest, it would be awesome if I could gain you as an ally. I see. A signal notified them and the audience that the break was coming to an end and the second match would soon commence. The second fight was between Derogue and Marcel. One thing was assured, it would be a heated battle. The two already stood in the arena when Seth came to the private booth. Upon the judge's signal, they charged at each other and collided in the center of the stage. Neither of the two held back and an explosion of golden and red flames flooded the arena. The shockwave shook the whole stadium, but the barriers kept the audience out of harm's way. Successions of explosions kept rocking the stadium. After a few moments, the flames cleared and the two combatants became visible. They were visibly confused. The audience followed them in being confused as the explosions did not stop. The source was not within the stadium but seemed to be coming from the city outside. What was going on? Suddenly the screens in the stadium changed to an emergency broadcast. Pictures of smoke and broken buildings were shown. Several big explosions have occurred across Delta. Citizens are advised to stay where they are until further notice from the authorities. They had not much attention to spare for the broadcast as a giant vortex formed in the sky above the stadium. It grew bigger and bigger, faster and faster, and finally broke. It turned into a giant flaming gate that opened in the sky above Delta. Resistance is futile, and a mechanical voice echoed through the minds of everyone present. Humanoid creatures left the gate. Their bodies were covered in pitch-black skin with a metallic sheen. Featureless blank faces and two long limbs that ended in delicate hands. They just stood there in the air, no floating, no wings, they stood there as if on solid ground. Oh, shit! Seth mumbled. Oh, shit! Simon mumbled beside him. Oh no, thought Yul Katzfer, who had been present when those things appeared in aura. A thing different from the others descended from the gate. It was twice as big and the leathery metallic folds looked like a priest's robe. Rejoice! The bringer of chains has come to release you from your suffering. The burden of choice will no longer be yours. We will free you from the Empire's tyranny. Giant black chains shot down from the gate in the sky and pierced the stadium walls and arena grounds and locked the space in the region. People had just started to react when torrents of thick chains rained from the gate and snatched them from the crowd. Chapter 287. Theocracy of Chains. Delta. What? They bombed the field generators? What are you waiting for? Get them repaired before something happens. It's too late, what do you mean? The Archbishop of the System Church hollered. We just received an emergency signal from Priest Simon. The theocracy has managed to open a portal, the acolyte answered, intimidated. The old man looked at him with eyes like floodlights. Where? The stadium. We have to hurry. Delta Stadium. The chains kept snatching people from the crowd. Many of them were previous participants of the tournament. Dohu, Elsa, Marcel, and even the Mist Demon were the first ones to be snatched and had no way to resist the divine tools. While Marcel and the judge were caught, Derogue was somehow ignored. The Sun Warrior kept punching the chains but could not deal any damage and was simply ignored. Nobody was safe. Several chains broke through the windows of Minasmar's private booth. Only Seth, Mina, and Mary were currently present in the booth as Simon had left to contact the church. Similar to Derogue, Seth was ignored by the chains, and they charged at the two women. Seth saw Mia vanish in the shadows and decided to shield Mary from the chains. Can't you summon Al Salzar? Mary asked in a panic. I would have already done that if I could. She's on cooldown. Seth barked in a hurry. His auto shields activated, blocking most of the metal tentacles while he guarded against the rest with his shield and wyvern blade. The chains that had lost their target when Mina fled changed their focus to Seth. They had ignored him at first, but he had now become a target. Seth fended off over 10 chains with his shields and weapons, all the while chanting a ballad to buff himself. When the new ones joined the siege on him, he tried to use his flames, but they could not phase his attackers. Mina appeared from the shadow behind him and slashed at the chains with shadow blades. Seth saw her behind him and dropped a chest from his inventory. Mina, take the chest and get geared up. The catgirl grabbed the chest and vanished in the shadows again. Outside the stadium. The chains were not just acting inside the stadium. Civilians were being kidnapped left and right when the archbishop and priests of the system arrived. In orderly rows, the priests surrounded the stadium. A huge formation was set up and a barrier shot up, cutting off the chains that extended from the gate. Resistance is futile. The dark angels stood in the air and hindered the barrier from reaching the gate. "You system dogs! You cannot stop us from saving these hapless sheep!" the bigger figure shouted. "Don't fall back! Strengthen your efforts." The archbishop ignored the mindless babble and strengthened his subordinates. The barrier slowly pushed the angels back and closed in on the gate. "Mark my words. This is not over." A huge number of chains pulled out of the stadium, robbing another huge number of people. They entered the gate, followed by the angels, before the barrier reached the gateway and crushed it. Theocracy of Chains Northern Alpha. Seth and many others from the stadium were cooped together in giant cages on a wide square of hardened dirt. It was surrounded by high castle walls. Moments before the gate closed, he had shoved Mary out of the way and was grabbed by one of the chains which had pulled him into the gate. He had tried to free himself using the soul flame, but the chains only heated up and glowed without losing integrity. Just before Seth was gulped by the gate, he removed all his armor and only wore uncommon casual clothes. He followed the advice Simon had given him in case he was ever captured by the Theocracy of Chains. No matter what he did, he ended up being thrown into the cage like everyone else. He saw a few familiar faces. The boy with the lightning wolf from the PvE event and the caster specialized in barriers were in the same cage as him. Many rows of cages filled with people covered the square and huge creatures patrolled between them. These wardens looked like insect centaurs with their black shells and 4 spindly legs they used to walk. On top of these bodies sat a humanoid torso clad in a dark metal, looking similar to the Dark Angels. But unlike the smooth faces of the Dark Angels, the face, or where the face would have been, of the warden was one giant faceted eye like that of a firefly. Their presence had silenced the captives. Simon had told him about the bringer of chains, but it had been a long time and Seth had a hard time remembering the details. There was only one thing that was clear to him. They were caught to become slaves and strong warriors were highly valued. But these warriors were also under constant and strict observation. A key point that Simon emphasized was that he had to put away all his strong items while he still could. If he could smuggle among the less important worker, he might get a chance to flee. A growing whisper reminded him of the reason for Simon's insistence. "I can't use home call, can you?" "No. What is going on?" "I can't even use the inventory." "The inventory?" "You are right, I can't even check my status." A high-pitched scream from the warden silenced the crowd once again. That was right. System options and rights were completely locked under the influence of the Church of Chains. They could not teleport away, call their pets or even bring their items out of the inventory. At the moment they could not even use their class skills. Only a few like Dohu or the Mist Demon could use them as they were their racial features. And it was shown in the different treatment of such people as they were heavily guarded in a separate cage by the bigger and more dangerous-looking versions of the wardens. Many people lost their hope faced with this realization. How were they supposed to escape without their powers? Seth didn't, because he felt that he could still use most of his skills, even now. Simon had mentioned something like this, but he only remembered when Al reminded him. They can't lock divine skills, that's why the chains did not target you at first. The bringer of chains could ban the influence of the system and skills, but not the power bestowed to a champion by a god. But then why was Seth still taken? Maybe because your state is ambiguous. You have some power from 3 different gods, instead of a huge lump like an actual champion. The Lich theorized. In that case Seth did well in hiding his skills until he saw a chance to escape. When he calmed down a little, he questioned why he could hear the sorceress, but not the caterpillar. One was locked in his inventory and the other in the pet space. Are you serious? I am an almost legendary sorceress. Don't compare me to a barely 1-year-old worm. It's not that hard to weasel myself through a generic lock like this. She bragged proudly. The captives didn't know what would happen now and could only wait. As they waited, Seth was approached by the young man from the PvE event. Hi. I'm Evan. You are the blacksmith from the tournament, right? Yeah, I am, Seth answered a little surprised. The young man noticed the awkwardness. I am sorry. It's just, you are the only person I kind of know here, he said, embarrassed. Seth observed him a little closer. Although Evan had gotten far in the tournament, one could barely call him a young man. The boy was maybe 16 years old. Maybe he felt insecure when he was unable to summon his pet? He had nothing better to do, so he started a conversation with him. Evan visibly calmed down when he found someone to talk. He was a beast master, a rare class that could not just tame beasts and was allowed to have a huge number of pets but also inherit some of the attributes and skills from his partners. It was a very strong class, but him being unable to summon his pets meant he felt even more vulnerable than the others. Time went by as the two talked when finally, a change happened. Chapter 288. Weighed, measured, judged. A person stepped into the square. This time an actual human. He wore a unique hat and black robes with red details. The symbol of chain links was embroidered on his chest and he wore a thick crimson-red chain around his neck. An entourage of people in similar robes followed him. They wore black chains on their wrists and their faces were covered in by a loose fabric with the chain symbol. As they later came to know, these were the chained apostles. A caste of priests that were in charge of welcoming new sheep to the herd. Anywhere else they would be called enslavers. Their blessing from God gave them the power to force others to answer their questions, to see through lies, and create slave collars based on the worth of the sheep. Their work was the judgment, registration, and enslavement of the captives by putting a slave collar on them. One by one the captives were taken from the cages and led before these inquisitors. It did not take long for Seth's turn. "What is your class?" the emotionless voice asked him, and he felt the urge to answer. Blacksmith he could not resist to answer, but what he said was his to decide. There had been more than enough people who tried to lie and got punished for it before him. Seth decided to be technically honest. "And your second class?" Scald. The priest made a derogatory sound and mumbled, "Useless. Wasting even the second class on something like that. You have been judged to be a menial worker. Your number is 3663. Remember it well, as this is the first and last name that will ever matter to you again." An ominous feeling overcame the priest as he said that, but he shrugged it off. Then he laid his hand around Seth's neck and started to mumble a chant. He felt the priest's hands heat up, and when the man removed his hands there was an iron collar around his neck. Just like it had happened to everyone else before him. With that, Seth's fate was decided and he was brought away with the other workers. The other fates he had seen were warriors who got bound by a silver collar and magicians who were bound by a golden one. As the most numerous, Seth followed the Rohan worker out of the square. When he passed the castle walls, he felt a restrictive feeling lifted only to be replaced by a new one originating from the collar. Past the walls came a desolate wasteland into view. Here and there he could spot rests of ruins among the dead plants and lifeless earth. They were led to a big camp at the edge of this wasteland where a lush forest could be seen. Rows upon rows of barracks waited here for them, like in some kind of convict colony. They were assembled before a rostrum. The guard here was not the creepy warden, but other humans wearing red and black uniforms. It took a while, but at some point, a man with a few medals on his chest stepped onto the stage. "Welcome to your new life, vermin. You have the great chance to help our wonderful theocracy grow into the future. I know of the lies you believe in and that the accursed system church had strengthened, but we will help free yourself of these thoughts. We understand that you will think of resistance or flight at first, but I advise you against it. The evil system's influence on you is locked and the filthy power had been suppressed. Resistance will be punished. Flight only means death. You cannot survive alone in this green hell past the border of this camp. Resistance is futile. Hope is an illusion." Many were hit hard by this cold speech, but Seth listened to it as if it was a stage play. Seeing the forest had a bigger impact on him. He had connected the dots about the theocracy raiding the Starta village, the recent capture, and this forest. He had returned to Alpha. This bridgehead of the theocracy was situated in the Sea of Trees, probably close to Deltan, the flooded city. His thoughts were interrupted by a brute shove against his shoulder. "Get into your barracks, 3663." A guard snarled at him and pointed at one of the buildings. Most of the building was one big room, like a hall, and it was filled to the brim with bunk beds. When Seth entered the sleeping hall, he was surprised to see a familiar face. Evan was also declared to be a worker and was sitting on one of the beds with a gloomy face. He wore a grey shirt and grey pants. The number 3647 was printed on the back of the grey jacket. Bundles of these clothes could be seen on the free beds. Did he also have to wear this stuff? Seth didn't approach Evan yet but threw him a look when the other finally noticed him. He found his bed because the number was stamped on the iron frame of the bunk bed and his grey clothes were placed on it. "You seem to be in high spirits for someone who just became a slave for the rest of his life," an old raspy voice spoke to Seth from above. On the upper bed, he saw an old man looking down at him. His old eyes seemed to relax and his bare, dirty feet dangled over the edge of the bed. "I will give you tip, young'un. Let go of all hope of escape. This old man has tried for his whole life. There is no escape. Seth got suspicious. If the man was trying to escape his whole life, didn't it mean he was not from Earth? Oh? You tried to run your whole life? Then why didn't they already kill you? The old man reeled in his scrawny legs and turned to lie on his belly and give Seth a good look. His unkempt grey beard and sparse hair made him look like a lunatic. But his voice and eyes were calm, with only a little hint of insanity. To discourage people like you. I am an example of the futility of escape. They really like the word futile. Seth muttered as the man leaned back on his bed. That they do. And chains. They talk more about those fucking chains than a goddamn jeweler. The answer came. I don't trust him. Seth didn't trust the old man either, but he was sure he could supplement his knowledge on how things worked here. The blacksmith kept talking to the old man and the other told his stories. He was here to show the futility of escape. It meant they wanted the old man to tell them about all the securities measures that stopped him. 1004, the man's number, had lost count on the many times he tried to escape and was ultimately caught. Whether these stories were true or not didn't even matter. Seth was sure there had to be some truth in what he talked about. He just needed to glean the right information from the prisoner's yarn. What Simon had told him and Al's presence helped. First and foremost was information on the slave collars. Depending on the quality of the collar they restricted the wearer more or less. Warriors were used as a fighting force. They could use their skills, but their collars allowed the priests to use mind control. They were forced to follow orders and could only act as mindless drones most of the time. Magicians were slightly better off. Depending on their specialization they had to either fight or help in research. Their skills could be unlocked depending on the situation. Their collars did not have the function to control them, but they would be punished with tremendous pain if they did not follow a command. Workers had access to any system functionality or skills completely sealed. They were no better than strong laborers. In exchange, they were only controlled by force. Their collars could be used to locate them if they fled, but that was all. Other than that, it was all about patrols, the terrifying wardens, the covered inquisitors that can find you anywhere, so on and so forth. These were the alleged reason why a worker couldn't run, even if they got rid of the collar. But nobody can get rid of these collars anyways. They are created with divine magic. It would probably need a craftsman blacksmith just to open these worker collars. Not to mention those of warriors or magicians. Oh yeah, that was nonsense. Even without his blacksmith's eyes he could see that the worker collars were just common items. Most blacksmiths could take them off. He guessed that it was similar for the gold and silver collars. Seth was sure he could take off his collar, but what came afterward? He couldn't just leave the people behind. Especially Doho and Evans had grown a little on him. It was better not to rush things for now. Seth wanted to observe the situation himself instead of deciding on the ramblings of an old coot. Chapter 289. Days as a slave. The following days were the worst. The guards would wake them early in the morning when the sun was not even up yet. They were fed a watery slop that seemed to be just enough to keep them from starvation. Their tasks could be summarized in 3 categories: wood, stone, or construction. The task could change depending on the guards or the overseer's mood. Wood meant that they were sent into the forest to cut lumber and carry it back to the camp. No matter how much they cut, it would have almost regrown the next day. Only the sinister enchantments surrounding the camp stopped the green hell from swallowing everything. Wood was the most dangerous, as the guard would not protect the workers from the beasts that could snatch up and kill a person in seconds. Losing some workforce was not an issue as long as they didn't manage to run. It took Seth a lot of control not to end the charade then and there. He wasn't the most empathetic person, but even he had rage burning in his chest when he saw the guard laughing at a worker being ripped apart by a pack of humongous spiders. Stone was the most intense work. They would be led along a stone road to a quarry. Stone was cut into bricks, and they needed to deliver them to the construction sites. The guard here loved to make use of their whips. Neither the old, the young, or the weak were spared and forced to fulfill a daily quota. As mentioned already, they didn't care to lose workers as long as they died of fatigue and didn't escape. Construction was a little less intense but could lead to harder punishments. They were using wood and stone to build whatever project the theocracy was working on. The most prominent was a wide and long road right through the lush forest. Here Seth also finally saw some of the warriors and magicians. The latter would fasten the ground and enchant the bricks of the road. They also seemed to be responsible for the enchantment that kept the fast-growing forest at bay. The warriors simply stood there along the road and killed any beast that came too close. It was a pristine, white stone street in the middle of giant green vegetation and lined by an honor guard of warriors. It would have been almost beautiful, majestic even if it wasn't smeared with the blood of slaves. Any mistakes that delayed the construction or damaged an already finished part could be punished with 50 whip strikes or death. It was a most ancient way of treating people that forced out every bit of energy a person had, only to throw away the dry husk once they were empty. Seth couldn't just leave. Even if he argued with himself that he could use the home call to return to Delta and get help from the System Church or the Krna Empire. He had no idea where this place was. It would take ages just getting to Alpha from Delta. And then they would have to make their way through the jungle to here? Seth doubted any of the workers could survive that long. But what could he do? He was sure that he could use his class skills even with the collar and that he could use them to remove the collars. Without the collar, he could bring out the token and summon Al-Salzar. The sorceress was unimaginably powerful, but even she herself was not sure how well she could fight those angels. There was also Puffles. Seth had no idea about the changes the Eye-Visor went through, but it had been powerful before, it couldn't have become weaker. Although he couldn't communicate with it at the moment, he was sure he could summon the caterpillar if things were dire. These were his options as a single person. In his days as a slave, he got closer with the others in his barracks. Mostly thanks to Evan, who had a talent for befriending people. The young Beastmaster had been turned into a worker because his skill relied on the system's beast space and the Church of Chains did not allow such options to be used. The others were either crafters or judged as too weak to be useful as warriors or magicians. They wouldn't be a big help in a fight, except for Evan. As Seth tried to think of a way how to break the whole bridgehead, an officer entered their barracks. 3663, he barked. Yes. Sir. Seth jumped up in surprise and answered. Is it true you are a talented blacksmith? Seth's eyes bulged. How the hell did they find out? Who shot him in the knee? Yes. Good. You are hereby relocated to the inner garrison. Follow me. He was too shocked to really react and simply followed the officer who brought him back into the castle. The suppression effect of the castle's barrier could be felt again the moment he entered. The officer led him through dark and winding hallways deep into the belly of the castle. Finally, the man stood in front of a door and pushed it open. Inside was a smithy and a priestess was waiting inside. As he stepped inside, he felt that the suppression effect had vanished again. Ask him, the officer ordered. The slightly older priestess stepped before him, cupped his face in her hands, and looked him in the eyes. Now Seth noticed the chains on her wrists. You are a blacksmith, correct? Yes. What is the level of your skill? Journeyman leave 8. What is the highest rating your items ever achieved? Relic. He had actually felt a slightly painful stab in his mind when he tried to lie. Okay, this should suffice, ask him the last question and then take off the collar, the officer grunted. Do you have any combat skills? Weapon mastery. The officer on the side snorted as if calling weapon mastery a combat skill was a good joke. Her pair of soft hands wandered to his neck and touched the collar around his neck and Seth felt it vanish. Now for the last test. Many of the warriors praised the repair skills you have allegedly shown during the event in Delta. Repair this. If you can satisfy me, you will stay in this room and produce weapons for our troops. If you can't, you won't need a place to stay anymore. The man put the 2 parts of a broken sword onto the workbench. It once was a bright silver longsword and it was made of something Seth saw for the first time. Artificial adamantium. Do it. Why yes, sir. Seth took a look around the smithy he was provided with. A forge, a tool rack, several workbenches, an anvil, a bed. It was like a prisoner cell/smithy. The room was neither small nor big. Seth. I can finally contact you again. What happened? Puffle's relieved voice echoed in his mind, but he couldn't deal with that now. This was an important situation. He could deal with these 2 now and flee easily, but it meant leaving everyone behind. It was too sudden to make any good plans. The other option was to do what they wanted and gain a place within the castle. It was a much better situation to come up with a plan to take down the whole place. Seth got to work. He readied the smithy and chose some tools. The only difference to how he normally did things was that he used no other skill than the basic blacksmithing skills anyone of his level would possess. The artificial adamantium was very hard, even after being heated for a long time. Seth used energy circulation too to further soften the metal. What he needed to do was to weld the two broken pieces together and bring everything back into shape. An hour later he was meticulously grinding and sharpening the rejoined blade until the spot where it was repaired became invisible. Truly someone close to the level of a craftsman, the priestess complimented. The officer took the sword from Seth's hands and grunted in agreement. Well done. From now on you are not to leave this room. You will be given food, materials, and a daily quota. Yes, sir. Seth answered. The officer and the priestess finally left. Look like you have a new job. Just what happened in the last few days? The Great Me demands an explanation. Chapter 290. Managing without. Delta. The whole city was currently in a state of emergency. There had been explosions all over the city and there was a mass abduction that had just happened on live TV. Many people felt reminded of the day just after the apocalypse and they didn't know how close they came to the truth. With the field generators sabotaged, more and more reports of gates opening in the city reached the Joint Emergency Command Center. The leadership of Delta and the remaining officials of Krina were hard at work to secure a command structure and deal with the situation. There was a heated debate about what had the highest priority. We need to reinstate the protective barrier of the city to stop random gateways from opening. This should be our highest priority, the Archbishop of the System Church stated. The normally kind-looking man with his well-kempt white beard and imposing aura resembled a demon of wrath at the moment. He did not even have the time to wash up and was still covered in sweat and dust. He spoke in a calm manner, but his eyes were blazing. Our engineers and enchanters are working on that matter as fast as they can. The problem is that the explosions cleanly destroyed our devices. 42 out of the 75 field generators in Delta are irreparable. We need replacements from the Empire or rebuild them from scratch. Even if our superiors work fast, it could take more than a week to get the replacements and set them up, spoke the representative of the Empire's forces. He was the one the princess left in charge when she set off to the east. We need all forces to work together. We need to deal with the gates until the new generators are set up. We have to protect the citizens, the spokesperson of Delta's government announced. But our own forces and those of the Empire are not enough. We are already hard-pressed at the moment. Can we expect the cooperation of the Adventurer Guild? He asked and looked to the guild master of Delta's branch. The hulking man of indiscernible age rubbed his cleanly shaven head. We will give out an emergency quest on your behalf. But nobody can force these people to fight in a situation when their own families might be in danger. Whether the bigger clans and player guild will make a move will probably depend on the remuneration. The spokesperson gritted his teeth but nodded. System Church, Delta. Monique sat at the head of the table with the other lords, Lydia, Simon, and Jack Felton. It was an emergency meeting at the System Church. Their tower master had been abducted just before their first big scouting event had ended. Not just that, a lot of people among the audience and even candidates for the Oath Guard had been taken. All of their faces were grave, with Mina and Mary being especially down as they were present when Seth had been caught by the chains. One was unable to help and the other felt guilty because he was protecting her. Simon's expression wasn't much better. He had left the VIP booth to call for the reinforcements from the System Church. He couldn't help thinking. What if he had been there? Maybe he could have changed this outcome. Although he was not supposed to interfere with a player's life as a priest. He had long seen Seth as a friend. Jack Felton looked serious and disgruntled at the assembly. He had watched the tournament as Monique had asked him to and liked the way it had been done. Real combat without risk to people's life or livelihood. However, he had no idea why he was invited to this meeting. We are all here to talk about how things will keep going from now on. Jane proclaimed. Mike, Jane, Monique, and me decided to suggest Monique as the Vice Tower Master and temporary leader. Does anyone disagree? Nobody seemed to disagree, so Monique spoke up. All right then. As you all know, Seth was abducted. Simon, he's still alive, right? As long as he doesn't do anything stupid and remembered my advice for once, then he should be alive. He won't enjoy it, but he should survive. What are the chances to save him? Mina asked worriedly. Sorry, I don't know. We can only roughly guess where the theocracy has built its base. If they really managed to restrict the overgrowing forest, they might be close to Alpha's A city. The faces of those native to Earth fell. They knew that this was a journey of almost half a continent. We contacted the princess. The Empire's troops are currently at Gamma. I heard they plan to establish a starter village there together with a teleport node. They are a lot closer to Alpha. She could get reinforcements from the Empire and send troops to check. So, we can't do anything to help Seth in the immediate future, Monique stated what they all thought. Just reaching Gamma would take weeks. Alpha could take months. Why are you all looking down like that? You are acting as if Seth is some damsel in distress that needs us to save him. Do you think he will just stay there silently and suffer? Finn knows he won't. Finn will bet all her candy that he will be back here before we even get the chance to set off. Finn bellowed. Everyone listened to the fairy's rant in surprise, but soon wry smiles appeared on their faces. Although she was throwing a mighty tantrum, they could all see on her tiny face how hard she was trying to hold back her tears. He will definitely come back. Just you wait, hug, HNG. But why is it Finn can never be the one to do the saving? It's okay, Finn. Mina stroked the tiny fairy's back. Finn is right, Monique said loudly, drawing all of their gazes. Right now, we have to believe in Seth. And don't forget, he has that crazy monster with him. It's not like any of us could be a bigger help than her. Right, he has the devourer of hosts. Evie mumbled and got a knock on the head from Allison. Don't call Master like that. At the moment we have to believe that he will come back with his own strength and manage Mina's march. What do you mean? Jonah asked. With our current status, we can't help Seth even if we set off in a hurry. Instead, we should do what we can. Grow the guild as planned and await his return. That's why I invited Jack for this meeting. He will be the key to setting up the Oath Guard as an effective force. I also wanted to leave the private examination to him. Are you crazy? The city is in a state of chaos and you want to keep going with that? Do you really think this is the right time for this? Jack suddenly exclaimed. The right time? Yes. In fact, I think this is a perfect time. Right now, the city is in an emergency situation. We already made ourselves known through the tournament. If we can set up the Oath Guard quickly and help in this chaos, we will gain the sympathy of the citizens. Jack was stumped, and it wasn't just him. Neither of them had known that Monique also had such an opportunistic side to her. The more and especially more prominent we help in the solution of this situation, the firmer our standing in Delta will become. More people will want to join us. And most importantly, we will be able to collect more materials for Seth. I'm sure he would be happy when he returns and finds the treasury filled with epic material and more. Only the members of Yule Cat's Fur were slightly reluctant in agreeing to not do anything to immediately rescue their blacksmith. But they agreed in the end. It was true they wouldn't be able to help right now, and the biggest help was already at Seth's side. Alright, since we agreed on this plan, let's talk about our actions from now. How long can the weapon store operate without Seth? He left quite a lot in the storage rooms. I think we should have enough for 4 to 5 months. Everyone on the table widened their eyes. Just how much had that crazy person churned out? I might have a good idea, Evie stated. Yes, Evie. You said that we should do our best to help in Delta, right? Yes. And the more prominent the better. Right, where is this going? How about we offer people shelter and protection? Are you speaking of your wards? You are right, that would be a great help in this situation. There aren't a lot with these kinds of skills. Monique nodded as if she understood. No. Not just those. I talking about extending the shield of Minas Mar over part of the city. What? You can do that? Simon exclaimed in a high-pitched voice. Evie nodded. Seth had given Evie administrative rights early on and was allowed to keep them as she had become quite proficient as a tower operator. The others were only moderators. They could use the system functions, but not change anything. Not just that, we could even use Minas Mar to monitor the unsealed part of the city and directly teleport to places with gate activities. We could be the first at the site, every time. Even without the Oath Guard fully formed, we could have a massive impact. They forgot Monique's opportunism. What happened to their cute innocent Evie? Chapter 291. Days as a blacksmith. Her face was marked from the stress of the last few days. Lena sat in her office rubbing her temples. A lot had happened recently, and she had a hard time dealing with everything at the same time. They had just fixed their alliance with Arjit Noor and got ready to bring over Astarta village when the followers of Zarkan suddenly went on a full offense. Her troops had a hard time holding their position and protecting the refugees. They managed to fight off the beast-like Zarkists with the cooperation of the Necromancer's reinforcement. The moment they got a chance to get a breath, she got a message that informed her of what had happened in Delta. While they were on the offensive against a new enemy, an old fell them in the back. Not just that. An unnerving suspicion kept gnawing at her. How had the theocracy of chains managed to infiltrate Delta? And the timing of the Zarkists' attack? Had these two powers allied with each other? It was a whole new worry pressing on her. Theocracy of chains. Seth sat down on the bed. He didn't really know what to make of this. He was locked in a room that didn't seal any of his skills or system rights, but where would he go from here? The space is still locked, so we can't teleport back. The Lich mentioned. I demand to know what is going on. Seth nodded and started reiterating what had happened. It also helped him to get his thoughts in order. His options had actually shrunk despite having more freedom. All ways to contact other people and gather information were cut off. At this point, he couldn't even run off into the woods and teleport away if he just wanted to flee. The officer mentioned that they would give him materials in a quota. This meant he was supposed to work as a blacksmith here. There was still the sorceress. It was possible to just break out and run, but he was still unwilling to just leave everyone else behind. There are no surveillance magics. Al assured him of his question. Seth came to the realization that he was momentarily stuck with his current options. If this was how things were, there was only one thing he could do. Make the best of the situation. He decided to use the chance to finish the items for the people of Mina's March. In this way, he hoped to finally rank up his skill and then finish his own gear. There were many things Seth looked forward to once his skills ranked up. Since his current options were not sufficient to help him solve the situation, he counted on those he could unlock. Like the blueprints and enchantments connected to Olympian myths, or possible perks of his class skills. The following day he was given artificial adamantium and some pieces of wood together with a list of stuff he had to make from it. 2 long swords like the one he had repaired and twin daggers. He was given 10 days to finish these items. This would barely be enough time for a normal blacksmith to finish such an order. For Seth, it was a lot of time. Even if he used a foreign forge, he could finish in half the allotted time. Part of the reason was his high level and stats, the other was that these were generic swords. It didn't need enchantments or anything. He had done hundreds of swords like this. If he used the spirit smithy, he could finish those in a day. That meant he had 9 days to finish the gear he had planned and hopefully rank up his skills. Seth wanted to reach the craftsman rank before he started on his own gear. It was good that he had prepared a lot of stuff so he didn't have to worry about the materials for most of the equipment. And like this started his days of secretly grinding his skills. He would make room by storing the forge and summon his spirit smithy and work on the equipment for the Lord of Mina's March. Every day there was a knock at the door and a dish of food and some water would be pushed in through a hatch. Seth was lucky he didn't have to rely on the food provided. He could use his inventory again and had access to his rations. Seth started with the easier things to get warmed up and finished the adamantium weapons. Although they gave him epic materials, these people were probably not expecting too much of him. After cutting some corners, it only took a few hours to finish the whole order for the theocracy of chains. Are you sure about this? Al asked, slightly worried. Although Seth did nothing but forge the weapon without any added effects, it was still an epic weapon in the end. Giving something like this to his enemies. Don't worry. Even if I give these to them, the crafty failsafe will still have its effect. My guess is that these are for the enslaved warriors because he mentioned that these were for the troops. If they have weapons that can't hurt me, it will be much easier to free them, even if they resist. Seth did not worry too much. He was sure that he could improve his skills in the next 10 days. The best case scenario was that these would be the first and last weapons he would hand over to these people. With his hopes set on the future improvement, Seth started with Mike's sword. The Catman had asked for a sword among swords. The essence of the weapon. It sounded like a complicated thing to ask, but Seth had already mastered this a long time ago. His very first uncommon sword had transcended the limitation of its material because of its perfected design. But before he started, he needed a forging ballad. To tie in with the success he had during his duel with Cerberus, he also decided to use an original smithing ballad. Most of the ballads and texts used for weapons called on a category of demons called war devils. They were specialized in raising havoc on battlefields and enjoyed watching warriors fight. The price for their blessing would normally include them watching the wearer fight and temporarily gaining strength. Among them, Seth found some great demons only a few people dared to call upon for a blessing. One of these was the addict of battle and violence. This demon came to mind because Mike was a focus warrior with his second class. This gave him high willpower and resistance to mind effects. This was important because the price that came with the blessing was a strong corruption depending on the effect. The effects of the few ballads he found on this demon ranged from a basic improvement of power during battle to going berserk and gaining more and more power on each kill. The stronger the blessing, the harder it was not to become a soulless killing machine. Seth hoped to find a middle ground that could improve Mike's performance in general, give him a slight boost upon a successful kill but without putting too much stress on his mind. Referencing the previous ballads written about the addict of battle and violence and using his notes, he took several hours to come up with a good ballad using songwriting. He would go back and forth singing it and changing lines that didn't fit right. He wasn't using any magical skill, but the evaluation of the system was a good indicator of the quality of his music. Although it was heart-rending. Ding! You have finished a song. Croaking of War. Common. Ballad. The clumsy attempt of a struggling apprentice bard to use his predecessor's songs to make a song of war. Great for singing under the shower, but make sure nobody listens in. Every time he changed something and attempted again, he would get such a shattering evaluation. The ode to the Queen he had written last time was rated rare. Was it just a fluke? The system's most devastating blow came when he expected it the least. Ding! Title: Struggling Artist Gained. You have created 100 poor versions of the same awful song. Willpower +1. In the end, and after many tries, his songwriting leveled up several times and he managed to create a rare forging ballad. Seth credited his experience with forging ballads, tenacity, and the high level of enchantment for this. It was definitely not musical talent. Anthem of Slaughter. Rare. Ballad. The result of a hard-working apprentice bard, who used a lot of education and references to come up with a good piece. Originally his title was Warrior's Anthem, but the system seemed to have a different opinion. Anyway, now he could finally start the forging. Using voice of Seth, Orpheus voice, and channeling, he got ready to sing his new ballad. Chapter 292. Days as a Blacksmith, 2. Seth used 3 billion Argentine pesos of crimson steel for Mike's sword because it was the material with the highest affinity for demonic ballads. It was also because it was the most numerous and reliable epic material he currently possessed. He sang a song in demon tongue. Of warriors that went to battle, not in valor, but to kill. Lacking honor but not skill, each of them would get their fill. Mercenaries to the bone, they fought not for ideals but money alone. As he welded the bars of blood-red steel together, the dark runic notes formed by his chanting would fall onto the metal and further darken it. Seth could feel the connection to the addict of battle and violence even stronger through the channeling. He could feel a gaze full of insanity and bloodlust on his shoulders. His heart pumped hard and felt like in the midst of a battle. The rare ballad was good, but it was the combination of his skills that managed to please the demon. His content could be felt in between the raging emotions that came through their connection. It didn't make Seth's job any easier, that he felt the rush of battle as he tried to forge a technically difficult sword. Especially since he was using soul infusion, too. He didn't know how well the ballad would end up working, so Seth infused one of the souls from the mist dimension to help Mike deal with the mind corruption. At first glance, the long sword looked simple, and that it was. The crux of the design laid in the refinement of the item. It didn't depend on material properties to patch its weaknesses. Good material only improved its strengths. It was a challenge for his craftsmanship, and he took a lot more time on purpose to check the blade geometry, balancing, and tapering of the blade. All the while singing his song to please his demonic audience. The effect was visible. By the time he finished the blade, Seth was drenched in sweat and the previously crimson steel had turned black with a dark red sheen. In a similar fashion, he forged the guard and pommel. Seth didn't have a lot of wood and he still needed some for the staffs of Bulko and Lixus, so he used the rare rated wood that came with the materials. It had no effects except being very durable. With a big sigh of relief, Seth plopped on the shoddy little bed in the room. The influence of the demon had receded with the end of the performance. Shocked, he looked up to the small, barred window and found that it had already become dark outside. He had totally forgotten the time as he composed the song and forged the blade. He had spent the whole day on Mike's weapon and was not even finished yet. Seth chugged a recovery potion and stood up again. He had only 10 days, more like 9 now. There was no time to waste. He still needed to enchant the sword. Mike was fast and strong. Instead of crowd control effects, Seth added fire damage and strength to the sword. As a cat person, Mike was more inclined to agility, so he added strength to balance it out. And the fire enchantment would simply pump up the damage he dealt. He knew what had gone into the weapon, but Seth was still surprised when he finally checked the finished item. Flaming Fury. Relic. Damage, 1350. Durability, 3220. 1 passive skill, Blessing of Violence. 2 plus 15% resistance to negative status effects, mind. 3 40% chance to cause mental disruption on hit, effects, stun/confusion. 4 plus 20% additional damage as fire damage. 5 plus 40 strength. 6 plus 15% mana regeneration. Another cursed weapon from the hands of Journeyman Smith. Those of weak will should never attempt to wield this weapon. The formidable workmanship and refinement of the piece led to a passive increase in damage and speed of 10% when wielded. Usage requirement, 200 willpower. At first glance, Seth was not sure whether his attempt to weaken the negative effects worked. The description did not really raise his hopes, and one even needed 200 willpower just to wield it. The resistance to the negative status effect of the mind was lower than expected. Something must have happened. His worries subsided when he saw the effects of the Blessing of Violence. Passive skill, Blessing of Violence, no cost, no cooldown. 1 When wielding Flaming Fury, all base stats will be increased by 30. 2 Each kill during battle will increase base stats by 20% for 1 minute. This effect can stack up to 5 times. 3 A random permanent attribute point will be granted every time the maximum number of boosts is achieved. Cooldown, 2 minutes. Malice, the longer a kill streak is maintained, the stronger the mental corruption will become. The skill alone had another 3 options, and from what Seth understood, there was no great danger as long as Mike fulfilled the usage requirements and was careful. Still, this was a terrifying sword, and Seth would not dare to touch it without his various equipment buffs that boosted his willpower past 200. As for the mana regeneration, Seth guessed that the effect of Karen's Obel triggered and added a random enchantment. The about 5% he had gotten in blacksmithing and the 7% proficiency in enchantment put a smile on his face. As long as he didn't compose new ballads for everything he wanted to make, he should be able to rank up his skills within the next days. But now he really needed to rest. Using lifestyle magic to get rid of the sticky feeling all over his body, he finally sunk on the bed and fell asleep. Even though the bed was hard and rough, he slept a lot better than during the nights at the barracks. Wake up, Seth. The sun is up. Just 5 more minutes. You asked me to wake you, so get up already. The blacksmith opened his crusty eyes and shrunk back like a vampire when the bright daylight from the window fell into them. Even with the stamina potion, it seemed like he had been a lot more tired than he thought. The days as a slave were not exactly restful. There was a lot of sleep he had to make up for, but now was not the time. Seth directly continued with Mike's armor. For the swordsman's armor, Seth decided on a mix of chainmail and hardened leather. Let the great me help compensate for your mediocre skills. He suddenly heard when he was about to assemble the breastplate made of reinforced troll leather parts. The next moment a roll of fine silk fell out from the pet space. The silk was silver with a sky blue sheen. What is this? Seth asked, confused. Be thankful. This is the new thread I can make. It's called sky silk. The eye-visor explained. Sky silk? Seth couldn't appraise it with his blacksmith's eyes, which meant that it had to be a pure tailor's material. Taking into account that the celestial bronze was already epic rated material, just what was the rating of this sky silk? When Seth tested the durability of the thread, he could almost feel it cut into his glove like a piano wire. It was definitely strong, but there was a problem. A big one. How am I supposed to use it? I'm barely an adept in sewing. He could hear a grumpy murmur from Puffles. Fine, let me try, and a small entrance to the pet space opened. Suddenly the thread in Seth's hand started moving on its own as if it was alive. This great me will help and fill in for your lacking skill. It was a slight back and forth, but soon they managed to smoothly work together, and Puffles stitched together the parts of the leather armor under Seth's guidance. While Seth and Puffles worked on the leather parts, Cerberus worked on the chainmail that would be worn under the leather. Even in a world with magic, chainmail was a very time-intensive work, and Seth was glad he could leave it to the golem. Cerberus could fashion the small rings in fast order with machine-like precision. The material used was bones of Seth. The reason was as simple as it was genius. Because of the weird property of the rare material, each ring would have its own set of effects. But this was not a problem, but the intention. Seth used the fact that different magics got into each other's way. Similar to the problem with wearing a ring on each finger or putting too many enchantments on an item. The many thousand rings with their own effects each would theoretically cancel out each other's effect, making it result in a simple chainmail shirt with a high durability. At least this was their theory. At noon Seth and Puffles finished the leather parts. A leather brigandine, bracers, gloves, high boots, and leg guards. Instead of fusing a sole into each of them, Seth decided to turn the bracers, leg guards, and brigandine into a set. Chapter 293. Days as a Blacksmith, 3. For the set Seth used 4 of the cold soles and 6 of the common medium-sized soles to make a big cold sole. Everyone else in the group had various kinds of crowd control effects. In theory, the combination of the frigid sole and the ice troll leather would take care of this for Mike. Seth engraved the complex circuits for shield and health regeneration onto the big sole before splitting it into 5 parts for the brigandine, leg guards, and bracers. He forged the parts to mirror the physical components before infusing them into the leather armor. A satisfied smile appeared on his face when he dunked them into the waters of Styx as the notifications of synergies chimed in his ears. The enchantment and the soles used achieved a synergy with the leather. Since he couldn't engrave or etch leather armor, he tried to achieve synergies for better effects. He had also looked for more songs that could be used to imitate magic enchantments. Ding! The item has improved due to a synergy between the materials Cold Soul and Sky Silk. His eyes widened at the third message. The soul and the silk had achieved a synergy. He hurriedly checked the armor's options. Frozen Sky Brigandine. Relic. Relic Frozen Sky Set 1/3. Physical.def, 1050. Mag.def 675. Durability, 3200. 1 plus 75% health regeneration. 2 20% less damage from frost-related attacks. 3 plus 15% overall power-up under the open sky. 4 passive skill, shield. A leather brigandine created by Journeyman Smith in cooperation with a divine being. Superior materials and mysterious practices were used in the making of this item. Once rumors of the armor's effects spread or it plays a role in the wearer's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Set effect. Plus 25% health regeneration. Plus 25% overall power-up under the open sky. Active skill, Ice Shield. Active skill, Hailstorm. If the whole set was worn it would give triple the health regeneration, grant immunity to frost attacks and improve the overall power by 55% under the open sky. In addition, there were another 2 skills added as a set effect. Ice Shield was quite literal. Active skill, Ice Shield, no cost, cooldown, 10 minutes. Create a shield of ice with 1000 durability. The second skill was slightly more complicated. Active skill, Hailstorm, no cost, cooldown, 30 minutes. As long as you are under the open sky you can summon a hailstorm on your position which will slow and deal ice damage to enemies in a radius of 10 meters around you. To his surprise, it was the Sky Silk that caused the most powerful effects. It showed quite vividly that Puffle's new material was a lot higher ranked than he thought. Maybe even legendary rated. What was left were the gloves and boots. He had left out the gloves on purpose because he had a special soul for those, but he had only one of them. Among the Dark Elves were also some swordsmen and fencers but he only managed to directly harvest one of those. It was simply called a swordsman's soul and was rated rare. As Mike was right-handed Seth forged the right gauntlet from the swordsman's soul and enchanted it with strength and dexterity. On the left glove, he used a strengthened cold soul and added health regeneration and willpower. Seth held back on the more abstract enchantments to offer Mike additional mana as these less spectacular enchantments needed less mana. Since Seth couldn't use the soul to turn the gloves into a set, he decided to modify them to use etching. The gloves were a hybrid between gauntlets and leather gloves and incorporated a few plates of artificial adamantium he made from the leftovers. He didn't have a lot of ink in his inventory which was why he wanted to use it sparingly. Seth didn't mind that there was little space to write on. It was better that way. The text he was going to use was called the It's a Sword. They're not meant to be safe. It had a very educational ring to it, but it was a text that overall spoke to specific war demons and increased the damage when a sword is used. Right glove of education. Relic. Relic Sky Sword Set 1/2. Physical.def, 275. Mag.def 310. Durability, 1700. 1 All sword-related skills are increased by 2 level. 2 Any magic damage dealt with the sword is increased by 20%. 3 plus 10% overall power-up under the open sky. 4 plus 40 strength. 5 plus 40 dexterity. 6 plus 100 mana. A unique glove created by Journeyman Smith in cooperation with a divine being. Superior materials and mysterious practices were used in the making of this item. Any swordsman would love this item. Once rumors of the set's effects spread or it plays a role in the wearer's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Set effect. Plus 35% damage with sword. Plus 20% attack speed with swords. Active skill, Ice Blade. The second option surprised Seth. Was it possible that the swordsman's soul was that of a magic swordsman? This was great. Especially with the additional skill as a set effect. Mike would be able to deal strength and magic damage of fire and ice using these items. The second glove was not as spectacular. Left glove of lessons. Epic. Relic Sky Sword Set 1/2. Physical.def, 275. Mag.def 310. Durability, 1700. 1 plus 50% health regeneration. 2 20% less damage from frost-related attacks. 3 plus 10% overall power-up under the open sky. 4 plus 40 willpower. 5 plus 150 mana. A unique glove created by Journeyman Smith in cooperation with a divine being. Superior materials and mysterious practices were used in the making of this item. Once rumors of the set's effects spread or it plays a role in the wearer's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Set effect, collapsed. With the gloves done, his blacksmithing and enchantment grew to just above 70% of leave 8. Last were the boots. Seth didn't originally plan anything spectacular with the boots, but the effects of the sky silk gave him an idea. He fused 10 medium-sized souls into a big one and enchanted it with featherfall and agility. The result was different but better than he thought. Ice Glider Boots. Epic. Physical.def, 315. Mag.def 410. Durability, 1700. 1 plus 20% health regeneration. 2 20% less damage from frost-related attacks. 3 plus 20% overall power-up under the open sky. 4 active skill, Ice Glider. A pair of smooth leather boots created by Journeyman Smith in cooperation with a divine being. Superior materials and mysterious practices were used in the making of this item. Thanks to the high craftsmanship, they grant 15% additional movement speed. The Ice Glider skill was the result of feather falling and the materials of the boots. Active skill, Ice Glider, no cost, cooldown, 10 minutes. When Ice Glider is activated, a film of ice is formed under the boots. For 30 seconds the user can glide over the ground or through the air on the ice path created like this. This sounded pretty cool, like the move of a superhero. Seth had no confidence to learn how to use this skill, but he had faith in Mike. He had to grin when he imagined the cat boy slip and land on his butt. Once Seth finished the jewelry, it would be done with Mike's gear, but he decided to make the jewelry for everyone in one go. Instead, he concentrated on weapons and armor. Chapter 294. Days as a Blacksmith, 4. The following days grew hazy as he kept working and only slept when he was too tired to keep working. His only breaks were for food and water. A shield for Tekker, Monique's armor, Lix's staff, Bulko's gear. But it was still not enough. So, he started to also make equipment for Lydia and the other members of the field service that were not parts of the lords like Ray and Shay. After the armors, he started making jewelry for everyone. Finally, the first thing to break through was enchantment, while Blacksmith was still some distance away from ranking up. It was a trance he had experienced before. Like a machine, he kept making items. Alsalzar and Puffles actually needed to remind him to eat and drink. Only the things he did just before finishing really stood out to him when he remembered back to these days. Finn's Amor. Seth drank another stamina potion to keep his concentration as he worked on this finicky piece of art. He didn't use the forge for this but was sitting at the jeweler's table with a big magnifying glass in front of his face. Finn already had a robe made by Nadal and infused with a soul by him. He would improve it further when they met again. What Seth worked on were tiny greaves, gauntlets, and jewelry for the fairy brute. As a specialist in close quarters combat, these would help increase Finn's damage output. Instead of simply trusting the auto-sizing function, Seth made the items fitting for Finn. Auto-sizing had its limits too, and this way he could use a useful enchantment instead. Another reason was that he was using demonic gold and it would count to his goldsmith skill, which slightly lacked behind blacksmith and enchantment in proficiency. Seth meticulously heated up the small gold plates to forge and bend them roughly into shape. He used this chance to chant the Brawler's Manifesto. It was a short song like a nursery rhyme. He used it because it had immediately made him think of the little fairy when he read it the first time. The books described the effects of very conditional. It was the kind of blessing where the demon offering the power would watch the fight and grant power depending on his satisfaction with the wearer. As Seth was using channeling during the chant, the only thing transmitted to him was a chuckle and the feeling of interest. He couldn't really interpret its meaning. The greaves were quite simple while the gauntlets needed some more intricate work. He lacked the material or even skills to make something like fairy-sized leather gloves for inside the gauntlets. As a workaround, the gauntlets became less like metal gloves and more like armored knuckle dusters for fairy hands. He used the sky silk to make straps for the armor parts. The armor pieces were very small, which restricted Seth to using simple enchantments. And even with the magnifying glass he barely managed to engrave one per armor piece. The stronger effects would need to come from the soul armament he planned to infuse. He engraved the gauntlets with strength but could not engrave the greaves as they would overlay with the enchantments on the soul. The most obvious change with enchantment on craftsman rank was that he could use up to 3 enchantments on one piece, which he directly used. A great point of demonic gold was not just that it was strong enough to act as armor, but also that it still kept the property of arcane gold, which was to store mana. The mana from the material was enough to make these simple enchantments permanent and lend additional mana. Seth used a medium-sized common soul for each of the greaves and enchanted them with the complex circuit of strength. He did this thinking of the effect of Finn's gear that would multiply damage depending on the strength difference with the target. As for the gauntlets, in a fit of megalomania, Seth wanted to replicate the effect of Evie's gauntlets. Using a strengthened cold soul, he spent some of the precious soul ink and inscribed his own song ode to the Queen onto the soul armaments before infusing them into the gauntlets. He didn't know whether this would work or not, but ever since he had the idea, he couldn't stop imagining Finn spawning demon insects her size with every hit. With great expectations he dunked the finished piece into the waters of Styx. Power Greaves, left. Power Greaves set 1/2. Epic. Physical DEF, 450. Mag DEF, 425. Durability, 2050. 1 plus 200 mana. 2-5% overall power up under the open sky. 3 plus 5% mana regeneration. 4 plus 135 strength. 6 plus 10% chant reduction. Tiny golden greaves made by the deft hands of journeyman Smith. Any martial artist would love to have these if he could wear them. Set effect. Plus 10 to 35% attack speed in unarmed combat. Plus 10 to 35% damage in unarmed combat. Unexpectedly, the special effect of Karen's obel had triggered on the greaves, which led to them granting chant reduction. Seth only observed them shortly before he put his attentions on the gauntlets. Frostmoth Duster, left. Relic. Frostmoth set 1/2. Damage, 350. Physical DEF, 450. Mag DEF, 425. Durability, 2050. 1 plus 300 mana. 2 plus 5% overall power up under the open sky. 3 plus 10% mana regeneration. 4 10% additional frost damage. 5 plus 10% less damage from frost-related attacks. 6 plus 30 strength. Tiny golden gauntlets made by the deft hands of journeyman Smith. Any martial artist would love to have these if he could wear them. Enemies will quake in fear and cold. Once rumors of the set's effects spread or it plays a role in the wearer's ascent to a legend, the item might become legendary. Set effect. Plus 10 to 35% attack speed in unarmed combat. Plus 10 to 35% damage in unarmed combat. Not the moths. Every strike with Frostmoth Duster had a 35% chance to spawn between 1 and 5 demonic frost moths that attack the target. Seth was a little surprised. He had bet on demon wasps. Would Finn be fine with spawning butterflies on hit? Well, he couldn't change it at this point. The fact the ballad even worked as an inscription was a great fortune. Don't look down on frost moths. They are quite dangerous monsters when met in the wild. Really. They look like dark blue butterflies at first glance, but when they attack they will cover their victim in the dust of their wing scales, which will drain mana and warmth out of any one hit. They will then proceed to feed on the incapacitated prey. Only dried out and frozen husks are left of their victims. A literal cold shower went down Seth's back. Looking at his skills, he was now at the cusp of goldsmith, journeyman, leave 9. The same was true for blacksmith. But Seth wasn't done yet. Next were Finn's accessories. A circlet and necklace for the fairy. The circlet was about the size of a pinky ring and made from thin demonic gold and fey steel wires the blacksmith braided and flattened. He simply infused a medium-sized soul with strength into the circlet. The epic-rated circlet made the proficiency bar barely budge. For the necklace, he made a tiny pendant from cold copper and used sky silk as the chain. Although copper was just an uncommon material, it had a good affinity with the cold souls from the ice trolls. He didn't know whether the moth's attacks could damage Finn, so he decided to try and give her more resistance to ice. Frosty necklace. Epic. Mag DEF, 325. Durability, 900. 1 plus 150 mana. 2 plus 10% overall power up under the open sky. 3 plus 35% less damage from frost-related attacks. 4 plus 15% affinity to ice. 5 plus 135 strength. A tiny pendant on a string made by the incomprehensible journeyman smith. Who is supposed to wear this? Ants? Was the system getting agitated? He was too. It was still not enough to overcome the few percent that separated him from the rank up. If he couldn't do it with quality, he would do it with quantity. There were still 2 points on his list. He needed to make soul armament weapons to fight Zarkists, and he wanted to make soul armors for everyone to guard against something like the weapons he was going to give them. Just to protect their souls, it didn't need anything fancy or expensive since full coverage was enough. A full suit for everyone in Minas Mar meant about 60 soul armaments. It was a good thing he was able to stock up on souls just recently. Seth started with the 15 daggers for the 13 lords without Mina and 3 members of the field service. He lacked epic material and used mithril instead. Soul Piercer. Epic. Damage, 825. Durability, 1800. 1 plus 45 agility. 2 plus 45 strength. 3 plus 45 willpower. 4 soulbound. A simple dagger forged by journeyman smith and enchanted with superior skills. Mysterious techniques have enabled the weapon to hurt an opponent's soul. Although they were only epic, they gave Seth almost 0.3% each, which was more than double what he got for other epic-rated items. Was it because of the ranked-up enchantment? Because of this, Blacksmith finally ranked up on the 8th dagger. He did it. Finally. The tension fell off him. He didn't mind that he had only finished half the daggers. He crawled on the bed and fell asleep. Chapter 295 Growing Guild. I can't believe you. Were you always like this? Jack spoke to the spearwoman beside him and shook his head. Evie's plan had worked wonders. With Simon's influence, they managed to offer their help as the first guild in Delta on the day after the incident at the stadium. Their offer was like a glass of water to a man dying of thirst in the desert. Not only were they the first, but their help also didn't end with only offering troops. If they enlarged Minas Mar's shield to cover some of the city, it could free up to 5 still working field generators. These could be quickly relocated and installed in other areas of Delta. But the biggest help was that they offered to monitor and protect a huge part of the unprotected city. Even if they lacked the troops to react to every gate, they could inform the authorities even faster than citizens. It was a blessing since gate locator devices were currently not present in Delta. They existed, but who would need them, when the whole city was covered in field generators? Now they dearly missed them. Although the offer seemed suspicious at first, it helped that their existence was already known because of their energy deal. Their name blew up in the city. The news that they used their own resources to shield a part of their city put them in a good light. But it was the rumors of the masked figures suddenly appearing almost immediately after a gate opened and mercilessly slaughtering all invaders, that really grew their name. People quickly made the connection between them and the masked figures at the stadium. Their growing popularity eased the recruitment process of many of the targets they wanted to scout and the first parties of the Oath Guard. And with Jack Felton's training, they soon started to appear, too. No, but I learned some things from the world. The people you help don't really care about why you help them. Whether you are some selfless hero or just look like one, the people you save don't care. Girl, you are too young for this kind of worldview. Does it change the truth behind it? No, the old man sighed. Fine, let's do this. Monique put on her mask, a stylized rabbit, and the two ported to a square in Delta. It was filled with the candidates for the Oath Guard who didn't want to take part in the public tournament. Several tens of parties and about 50 solo adventurers. Jack would oversee the tests this time. He would accompany the parties into the dungeon and duel with the solo adventurers. Although the dungeon runs would take some time, the duels often ended very quickly. With his experience and skills as an instructor, it didn't need long to judge or even defeat someone in a 1v1 duel. Only 15 of the 50 passed Jack's test. They were not necessarily the most skilled of the bunch, but that wasn't the goal. Jack took those with skill and a good personality. I have something to do. I will leave them in your hands. With that, Monique left again. Gamma. At least some good news. Lena sighed. If only things on this side would go this smoothly. She thought to herself. After the initial attack of the Zarkic cult, they had managed to recover and slowly gain the upper hand in the skirmishes. Their preparations to phase over Astarta village were going smoothly and the refugee camp kept growing. Until yesterday, when a new kind of abomination appeared among the Zarkists. They called those things the Enlightened Ones, but to Lena and her people, they were mindless beasts with random abominable mutations. They were as strong as they were ugly and could be likened to stone ogres or hill giants in strength. These creatures had a weird impact on their allies from Argent Noir, which disrupted the flow in battle. She had lost many soldiers during the first battles involving these new beasts. To make it even worse, the followers had changed to guerrilla tactics and often attacked the refugee camp in small groups at random times. It wasn't so much their power that was the problem, but their infectiousness. Just a scratch could turn a refugee into a Zarkist, and a scratch from these Enlightened Ones could turn them into a creature similar to them. Her only guess was that the champion of Zarkan had managed to level up his skills or gained a stronger blessing. They were a real pain in the ass. All these interruptions kept interfering with the establishment of Astarta village. It assured her more and more of her assumption that Zarkan and the Theocracy of Chains had struck a deal. But she could only grit her teeth and clench her fist. As long as she brought over a village, she could turn the situation around. Just a teleport node would already have helped, but they didn't have the materials to make one. She could only count on bringing over a village. Screams in the camp pulled her out of her thoughts. Another attack. No Man's Land. From Y City she had kept wandering northeast deep into the No Man's Land. The vegetation had already seemed weird before, but in the last 3 months, she had spent in the city, it had changed even more. The trees looked like trees, but somehow foreign and almost alien shrubs and plants in between. Thick fleshy leaves and bulbous buds. It was as if not just alien creatures but even vegetation came through the pathworks. Her way led through the mountainous region between the gulfs of Sita in the south and Sigma in the north, avoiding the thick unnatural forest in the south. She had already wandered much further than she had ever come before. She was stronger now, fitter. With her higher level and stats, she was able to walk a long distance in a rather short time. There were no signs of the man who had beaten her up last time. Missing a destination, she aimed for Epsilon, the district at the northeastern coast. Sometime after passing the place of her defeat, she came across a city. The night was already falling and she could make out the silhouette of the skyline with illuminated windows. There was not supposed to be one, there was no district here. A city from the time before the foundation of the district, but not a ruin. Her interest was piqued by the well-developed defense that guarded the city against outside threats. Big barricades made of concrete and scrap metal made up a sizable city wall. The materials made her think of post-apocalyptic movies. However, the magical symbols completely destroyed that image. They gave off a dim glow in the dark. It didn't really fit together, but function was more important than form in these times. After walking along the walls for a while, she found a heavily guarded city gate. The guards looked rough and uncivilized. They wore tattered armor and barely maintained weapons. Could such people really survive out here, and even as guards? They didn't look like the kind with the knowledge to build such walls. Hey, you! Don't come any closer. We don't take in any more refuge. The last rays of the sinking sun illuminated her face and the rough guy immediately stopped talking. His voice had completely changed tone when he spoke again. Oh, sorry. We couldn't possibly send away a damsel like you, he said with worry, but she could hear his underlying meaning and read the smiles on the faces of his companions. Disgust grew in her heart, but it didn't show on her face. She made a decision, cast a spell, and left. The guard dirty hands grasped around her shoulder, and with some surprise he found that the girl smiled slightly and followed them into the guardhouse without any resistance. It was only when he and his companions got down to business. They were in the middle of having a good time with the lady when the spell unraveled and they realized in horror what they were doing. In screams and confusion, they scattered, taking as much distance from each other as they could. Hurriedly they got dressed again, some in shame, others in tears. A few had suffered a little worse than just psychological damage from this experience. With a malicious smile, she continued on her way. That would be a lesson those guys wouldn't forget in a lifetime. She didn't have a map skill and could only roughly navigate with a map and a compass. It was somewhere halfway to Epsilon when weird monsters started to appear in the last few days. Most of the things that crawled out of the gates often fit the description from fantasy and fairy tales. These were different. They looked like dinosaurs with names like Velociraptor, Kleptosuchus, or Alcoholiensis. Some of them were about the size of a human and incredibly fast, while others were gigantic and still fast for their size. The carnivores were quite tricky even for her, but at least the herbivores were chill. As long as she was careful and evaded the bigger predators, she was not impeded by the change in fauna. Chapter 296. Olympian Enchantments. Seth, wake up! Wake up, you crazed metal beater! You have to put away the smithy before they come. Seth drowsily opened one eye to look around his little cell. The voice of Puffles and Al woke him up. Come on! Those lunatics will come soon to get those weapons. You have to change everything back before they come in. His heart dropped down to his feet and he was wide awake when the shock set in, and he realized what they were talking about. Seth had to unsummon his spirit smithy and replace it with the previous furniture. In a hurry, he jumped off the bed and got to work. The first rays of the morning sun had just fallen in through the tiny window when he heard the door to his cell being unlocked. He had just finished putting everything in place and sat before the cold forge polishing the weapons he had made on day one of his stay. The door opened and the officer he met 10 days ago stepped in. Are they finished? His sharp eyes scanned the cell and came to rest on the weapons in Seth's hand. Why yes, sir. Seth answered, acting intimidated. A different priest from last time followed the officer into the cell. Let me have a look, the newcomer said and took the sword from Seth's hands. The man walked hunched and had the hood of his dark blue robe pulled deep in his face. His fingers that were gliding along the smooth surface of the sword were long and gnarly from age. Although Seth had not really tried with these items, it wasn't like they were lacking. They were proper epic equipment in rank and finish. A journeyman, you said? Yes. This seems like the work of a high-level journeyman. It will suffice as a weapon for the warriors once our branch enchanted it. The priest kept the sword as he left the room. 2 younger priests in similar, less ornate, robes came in to take the second sword and the twin daggers. Don't relax too early, 3663. Your workload will only increase from today onwards, he said coldly. His piercing gaze wandered across the worn and slightly dirty worker uniform and he scowled. Take today as a break. You will be issued a new set of clothes. You will get your next batch of materials and quota tomorrow. With that, the man turned around and left the cell. The door was swiftly locked by a guard after the officer stepped out. Seth rubbed his temple. Although they were not friendly here, it was better than the cruel environment at the slave camps. He would even get a new set of clothes. He would be so happy if he didn't have problem with the whole slave thing. So today was a break? He sunk back on the bed and continued catching up on sleep. He was woken again by the sound of the door being unlocked somewhen around noon. A young female slave in a medieval maid outfit stepped in and put down a set of fresh worker clothes on the ground. She wore a thick slave collar that identified her as a slave, but Seth recognized her. She was one of the participants of the PvE tournament. She was an archer if he remembered correctly. He had fixed some part of her armor back then. Her face was emotionless except for the light twitch under her left eye. She only put down the clothes and left again like a robot doing pre-programmed movements. Disgusting. Al commented, the way they suppress even their emotion from showing is vile. Seth nodded when he understood what she meant. The importance of sabotaging this whole place only kept increasing. Who knew what these people were forced to do, without even getting the chance to cope with it? He had to get ready. It was time. From the looks of that priest, he wouldn't be able to hide the fact that he had upgraded his skills and he had no idea what would happen when they found out about it. Now that he had somewhat recovered and could think clearly, it was time to see if there were any changes that came with the rank up. All skills based on Blacksmith were now on Craftsman rank, 2. Enchantment on Craftsman rank enabled him to not just use 3 different circuits but also try and combine them into more abstract effects. Al explained that as the level grew, he would be able to do it with up to 4. This opened some new paths, but his biggest hope was the enchantments and blueprints that were granted through his blessing, and fortunately he was not wrong. Many had been locked because of his skill level. Now there were quite a few that he could use. He also found that they were split into Olympian and Chthonian enchantments. Seth had always called them the former because the first 5 he had unlocked came from the knowledge of Hephaestus and counted as Olympian enchantments. Most of the new ones seemed to be based on Hades' realm and the Chthonian gods. When he looked through these sigils in his enchantment catalog, his memory of their usage and the way they work was refreshed. Their effects were overwhelmingly powerful, but they came with special restrictions. Each sigil had its own enchantment and could only be used once, and it had to be the only enchantment on that item. And all of them were unique. There could never be two items enchanted with the same sigil. For example, the first Chthonian enchantment was Titan Physique, unique. The enchantment grants an increase in all aspects to mirror the physique of a Titan of the Titan race that is imprisoned in Tartarus. He could enchant exactly one item with Titan Physique but not a second, so he would never be able to wear two items with Titan Physique or give someone else a second item with this power. Seth had to think carefully about what items to enchant with these, as he would have to destroy them if he wanted to reuse the sigil on something else. Looking at the possible need to erase the enchantment at some point, Seth naturally thought of his soul armament first. It was relatively easy to erase an enchantment through soul forging. They all had one thing in common, which was that their description was often only vague and Seth had to infer the effects. This was different from his experience with the first 5 he had experimented on before. Their effects were rather clear, like the enchantments of the system, and their names just as simple. They all had started with Olympian, durability, sharpness, speed, defense, and levity. Quite straightforward. They all had similar effectiveness. But it didn't mean this held true for the newly unlocked ones. It was another point to consider. Which soul would he use and how big would it need to be for the optimal performance? Before he even started on these, there was one last thing he wanted to do first. Level up his spirit forging. Seth compared his skills, and when they usually got a perk and he felt that the skill was not far off from leveling, there was hope it would gain a perk. Following his instinct, his first action was to forge the soul armaments for the people of Mina's March. He redecorated the room again to fill it with his spirit smithy and went to work. Using his most abundant souls, the common medium-sized ones, he made a soul armament from each of them. There was no time to enchant them, so he didn't bother with it. One soul became one piece of armor. The only effects on them came from the effects of Karen's obel that would trigger once in a while and add an option. Although he didn't bother with the effects or material, he forged them into detailed ghostly armors. He felt his skill rise the more he made and the better he refined the details, when finally, ding! Your skill Soul Forging Leave 5 has become Soul Forging Leave 6. The skill leveled up after he finished 36 soul armaments. Seth had worked from noon deep into the night before he got what he wanted. Although it was a risk, he decided to sleep tonight. Making more would be just a waste at this point. He could make a lot when he was back home. This time he remembered to put everything in place for tomorrow when the new materials and order came in. Chapter 297. A special hat. Seth, they are coming. Seth had slept quite deep thanks to his fatigue, not even the hard and uncomfortable bed could have changed that. He heard the key rattle in the lock of the door. He just sat up when it swung open. 2 workers led by a well-kempt officer brought in 2 big boxes and put them on the wall beside the door. This is your quota. Finish it in the next 6 days, he said with visible disgust at Seth, who still wore the dirty set of clothes and had not washed up before falling asleep. He put the paper on a workbench and left without looking back. The worker followed and the door was closed behind them. When Seth stood up to take a look at the materials they brought him this time, he found his breakfast on the boxes. They had brought it in at the same time. Seth was not one to deny food, even if it was bad like this one. At first glance, it was the unidentifiable porridge they gave him every morning. But this time it tasted slightly better and sweeter. Was it because he had shown his worth and now he got slightly better treatment? It didn't matter. He already made up a plan to escape. 6 days should be enough to fix up his own gear. At least the most important ones. Seth took a look at the paper. No wonder the food was better, their demands increased. 5 swords and 3 maces in 6 days. No problem for Seth, but a guaranteed death of fatigue for a normal blacksmith. It's a test. Yep. A test? Puffles questioned. A normal blacksmith, as I am acting as, could hardly achieve this without major flaws in quality. If I were to just brainlessly make these weapons, well, they would know I am more than just a blacksmith. They are already suspicious. It's good that we will escape here soon. Seth took a look at the materials in the boxes, and it assured him that this was a test. One box had 2 different kinds of epic woods. The other box was half filled with artificial adamantium and the other half was actual adamantium. Seth had never used adamantium before, but he knew that it was extremely hard and durable and had a natural resistance to magic. The system described it as an epic material, but for a blacksmith, it was a legendary difficulty to forge it. Even Seth guessed that he would need 1 or 2 days to make a single sword from this stuff. He gladly pocketed this for later. Since he was now alone, he could start working on his own soul armament. He felt especially confident because of the perk soul forging had gotten with level 6. With level 6 the soul armament would have the same effects as it would have after being infused into an item. It would not be weakened anymore by its immaterial nature. But the soul armaments had to wait. He started with the most important of them all. The indispensable item for his escape. An Olympian blueprint unlocked with his skills rank up. The Helm of Hades, also known as his cap of invisibility. It made others unable to notice him. Even gods or angels would be unable to detect him. If he managed to make this, there should be no problem exploring the place. It was only possible because Seth was lucky enough to still have 3 billion Argentine pesos of epic-rated Olympian silver. 2 would be enough for the helmet, which meant he had 1 spare bar. The difficulty came with the whole process of making. On one hand, Seth had more or less avoided making helmets if not needed. It meant that he was not as practiced in driving the metal. This was a hurdle in making the Helm of Hades, as he needed to forge it from a single piece of metal. It was one of those fierce-looking helmets from Olympian myths, like those that hoplites would wear to battle. It had a nose guard, sharp-looking eye sights, and impressive cheek guards. The second hurdle was that it came with its own smithing ballad. It was a language he could not even understand with universal translation, and the only reason he was even ready to try it was that the whole text and melody was projected into his brain when he studied the blueprint. He would just need to repeat and sing along with a completely foreign language while forging a helmet he was not used to. Easy, right? But it didn't end there, as the cap also came with its own enchantment which covered the whole piece in intricate detail. For Seth, it simply looked like ornate engravings of soldiers and battles. He had no idea which ward was responsible for the magical effects. His heart sank and his intestines formed a massive knot at the thought of the work that was awaiting him with this item. He took a deep breath. It wasn't like he had a choice. Right now it looked like much, but he would just have to start and do it step by step. With these thoughts, Seth went to work. He fused 2 of the silver bars and started driving the metal, following the divine blueprint. At first, it was hard and he made many mistakes. He missed the spots he wanted to hit and he hit too hard and had to spend time fixing these mistakes. All while awkwardly forming the foreign words in his head and trying to stay in tune. Every mistake in forging could mess up his singing, and vice versa. The stress of missing a note could mess up his hammer strikes. After an hour or 2, he had lost his sense for time. He finally fell into a groove. It wasn't like he spent his time at the Bard College for nothing. After repeating the ballad several times and learning from his mistakes, he managed to sing it along flawlessly even without knowing what he sang. He had spent even longer forging metal, and once he got the knack of it, he actually started having fun driving the metal in shape. At one point came the time when these 2 feelings united and he struck and drove the metal along with the tune of the song. Here Seth made the decisive decision to scrap what he had done so far and start over. As a blacksmith, one needed to be able to make such decisions. Seth put the half-finished and crude-looking helmet into the furnace. He added the spare bar of silver to it and started powering up the bluish-pale spirit flames. He only left out a small part of the silver to make an engraving tool later. Seth didn't notice any change and poured the metal into the casting mold for a bigger bar. But when the metal had solidified and he took the bar from the mold, the blacksmith noticed a blue hue in the glimmer of the previously pristine silver metal. He couldn't see any difference with blacksmith's eyes. It was still the same epic-rated Olympian silver. Seth could only hope it wouldn't be a problem. This time he started with the right timing and rhythm from the beginning, and step by step the helmet took shape beneath his hands. He sang with Orpheus' voice and voice of Seth from the start, but at some point, he felt his channeling activate automatically. The gaze of a pair of serious eyes, the presence of darkness and majesty. It felt like a ruler was gazing down on him. But there was no pressure. On the contrary, at most, there was guidance. Like that of a father who had a hard time showing his emotions. When he finally finished the imposing-looking helmet, the presence didn't vanish. Seth didn't mind. He guessed this was Hades and Hades had blessed him. If he wanted to watch, then Seth didn't mind. His next task was covering the piece in elaborate engravings, and Seth finally had a guess of what they depicted. Looking closer, they were most like the tales of Hades' deed in the war against the Titans. A figure walking among enemies without being seen. Sabotaging their ranks and siege weaponry. stealing their plans and even assassinating their leaders. Before he could engrave these pictures onto the helmet, he needed to make a new engraving tool. He didn't know whether adamantium would work on Olympian silver. Instead, he fashioned one from the same silver and tried hardening it. With the new engraving tool, he started transferring the depictions of Hades onto the helmet. The pressure of Hades increased in strength and it actually felt similar to inscribing demonic poems. Seth had long lost any awareness of his surroundings. There were only his work and the presence behind him, watching him. It felt like a weird dream, that only ended when he finished carving the last stroke into the helmet. The bright silver of the metal rapidly darkened, turning almost black with a silvery blue glint. The pressure vanished. The presence vanished. It was as if Seth had woken up from the weird dream. "You are finally responsive again!" Al exclaimed. "What happened? You are back. You didn't respond for almost 2 days." Puffles answered this time. 2 days? He asked perplexed. When he looked at the door, he saw 3 bowls of slob piling before the hatch in the door. He got 2 meals a day, this meant what they said was true. He had worked from the day the materials came to the evening of the second day. His stomach gave off an affirmative growl. He had not eaten a thing for over a day. The fatigue was also catching up to him in a sudden rush. The slops from today were still okay, so he chucked those down before filling his stomach further with food from his inventory. The one from yesterday smelled bad, so he emptied it into the forge where the food was burned. He put the 3 clean bowls before the hatch and laid down on his bed. He fell asleep immediately. Chapter 298. Soul Armaments. Nobody woke him up this time. He woke up because he had slept enough. It was around noon and another bowl of slop was already waiting at the hatch of the door. He remembered finishing the important helmet and brought it out to appraise it. He rotated the dark helmet in his hands. It felt light but had a certain gravity to it. Seth couldn't appraise it. Blacksmith size Leave 5 was not enough to see the item's options. It was definitely a piece of armor. His skill was supposed to work. This could only mean it was above epic or even relic rating. Was it legendary? Or maybe a completely different rank? It's probably a divine armament. Al stated after his question. She explained that things like these, similar to stuff like a holy sword or some mythic items she heard of, could not easily be appraised. Since it was filled with the power of a god, it was not hard for them to block system skills. In the best case, it was enough of the leveled his appraisal skill, but it could also be that there were special circumstances that needed to be fulfilled to get information on the item. If he couldn't appraise it, there was only one thing he could do to find out about the effects. Test them. He unceremoniously put the helmet on his head. The helmet turned clear and with it Seth's whole body. He felt the item's power wash over and in the next moment, a terrible feeling of nausea attacked him. Hurriedly he took it off again. His first thought was that the item probably had usage requirements. He was the maker and a champion of Hades, so if it specified him or someone worthy like the staff of Seth, he would fulfill those. The second possibility was that he needed a specific number of stats to wear it. To test it he simply wore his full gear and put on the helmet again. Seth vanished, but the nausea was still there. However, it was much weaker. Wearing it slightly longer now he also noticed that it constantly used mana. By taking off and switching armor pieces, Seth slowly found out the helm's requirements. He needed roughly 400 willpower, 200 intelligence, 250 dexterity, and 250 endurance to wear the helm of Hades. Knowing this was a big help in choosing which Olympian enchantments to use on the soul armament. Seth started with Titan's physique because it was the first on the list. This may have been a coincidence, but judging by those that came afterward it might have been a method. He started off with a normal medium-sized soul. The new perk caused the souls to be a lot more tangible during the forging process. It made the forging slightly harder but allowed much more details than before. Compared to the Helm of Hades, this increase in difficulty was nothing. Since nobody was going to see this one, and the enchantment he wanted to use was Titan Physique, Seth chose to forge a classic ancient breastplate that imitated some awesome chesticles in a six-pack. Nobody would be able to judge him if the armor was not visible from the outside. When he finished his little work of art, a representation of the male ideal, he started engraving the sigil of Titan Physique on the sternum of the breastplate. After he finished the sigil, it was as if it came alive and many carvings started spreading like roots from a core. They covered the whole breastplate before he finally got the notification that it was finished. Titan Cuirass. Soul Armament. Magic DEF, 45. 1 Passive Skill, Titan Physique. A special armor from the hands of craftsman Smith enchanted with divine power. Well, this wasn't very impressive, but the skill itself was tremendous. Passive skill, Titan Physique, 400 mana per minute. All basic attributes plus 50. All basic modifiers plus 2 per point. Not only did it add 50 to all his attributes except for luck, this was the first enchantment he saw that improved the modifiers. Normally modifiers only grew every 10 levels depending on the class. For example, Seth's basic physical defense was about 3 points per 1 point in endurance. Now it would be 5 times his endurance. Same with his attack speed, damage, or mana. It might not sound like much, but this was an incredible boost. Especially for things like his base damage, which were pitifully low thanks to his crafting class. His attack damage was roughly thrice his strength, while even a common fighter class would deal 5 times their strength as base damage at his level. The only drawback was the cost. 400 mana per minute. If he wanted to make this a permanent improvement, he would need to add a lot of souls. It was a good thing that he held back a little when he made the armors of his friends. He had not held back on the medium-sized souls for his friends, but he still had 8 big common souls up his sleeve. A big soul had a mana regeneration of about 100 per minute, so he just needed to spend half of them to make the effect permanent. Just half. He definitely wasn't holding back tears or anything. It wasn't like this was all the accumulated hard work of the hunting session during the last 4 months. It helped that he had gotten a lot from the Zarkist still. Those souls had been a lot of work. There was no changing the inevitable. Seth infused 4 big souls to turn the passive skill into a permanent improvement. It actually provided slightly more mana than the enchantment needed, and additional mana was added, 500 mana as a secondary effect. How great would it have been if he could add even more effects, but that would not be possible. Seeing how dominant the sigil was, he was afraid that there might be complications with other enchantments or even effects of a soul. This was why he opted to use the common souls for now, as they had no effects to begin with. Titan Cuirass. Soul Armament. Magic DEF, 3300. 1 passive skill, Titan Physique. 2 plus 500 mana. A special armor from the hands of craftsman Smith enchanted with divine power. He couldn't lie, he was quite satisfied with how it came out. When he wore the new soul armor, he felt the increase in power rush through his body. For a moment his body became taut as all his muscles tensed up for a moment. Seeing how this had worked well, Seth's gaze wandered to the other enchantments on his list. There were some that fell in line with the effects of simple enchantments among normal enchantments. At least that was what he could infer from the description. For example, Alecto's Hunt seemed to increase agility, or Tisiphone's Gravity, which probably did the same to willpower. Most of these new blessings were Chthonian enchantments, which meant they followed blessings or features of figures associated with the underworld of Hades. Seth tried testing them the same way he had started with the Olympian enchantments. He created a pair of soul boots and enchanted them with Alecto's Hunt. Alecto's Claws. Soul Armament. Magic DEF, 83. 1 plus 15 agility. 2 plus 5% movement speed. A special armor from the hands of craftsman Smith enchanted with semi-divine power. This was almost disappointing at first glance. Compared to generic enchantments or even Olympian levity, which granted up to 50 agility and 25% movement speed. His mind changed when he infused his old pair of soul boot into the new ones. The power of the effects grew. Seth kept infusing medium-sized souls. The additional movement speed kept increasing up to 25%, but the agility showed no signs of stopping. Seth had a new theory. Some of these enchantments that mentioned no set limit worked on the basis of the higher the input, the higher the output. The execution of the enchantment probably regulated the conversion rate. As long as Seth infused souls, it would increase. He infused another 12 medium-sized souls. He stopped when agility reached 100. Another option was added. Seth took it as a sign to stop for now, as he still needed souls for other items. Alecto's Wings. Soul Armament. Magic DEF, 830. 1 plus 100 agility. 2 plus 25% movement speed. 3 plus 10% movement speed when hunting a target. A special armor from the hands of craftsman Smith enchanted with semi-divine power. Although it was powerful, the trade-off between cost and effect felt worse than Titan's Physique. Seth compared the two and stumbled over the fact that Alecto's Wings were enchanted with semi-divine power. It took a moment before he had any idea what might be the solution to this conundrum. There were 2 other enchantments called Tisiphone's Gravity and Megara's Deduction, which were associated with the Furies. Based on the kind of effect they had, Seth chose to make a pair of rings with these two. Although he did not have to, he put quite a bit of effort into forging the rings. He made them in the style of a sigil ring, so he had space to engrave them. Like the two previous tries. Once he finished engraving, they would grow and cover the whole item. Ding! You have created a divine set. He got a notification from the system after he finished the second ring, and a set effect was added to the 3 soul armaments. Tisiphone's ring. Irene's set 1/3. Soul armament. Magic DEF, 67. 1 plus 15 willpower. 2 plus 5% mental energy. A special armor from the hands of craftsman Smith enchanted with divine power. Set effect. 3/3. Plus 100 agility. Plus 15 willpower. Plus 15 intelligence. The semi in front of the divine power had vanished. His guess had been correct. The Furies had to be assembled to show their complete power. Now they had a set effect. Seth strengthened Tisiphone's ring, and the willpower in the set effect grew as much as that of the ring. At first glance, the set effect doubled the first effect of the 3 items. But since they could be strengthened, there might be even more if he strengthened them in the future. It took between 10 to 15 medium-sized souls per ring to strengthen them to the same extent as the boots. They also grew in a similar fashion as the boots. Tisiphone's ring. Irene's set 1/3. Soul armament. Magic DEF, 789. 1 plus 100 willpower. 2 plus 25% mental energy. 3 plus 10% mental energy recovery in battle. A special armor from the hands of craftsman Smith enchanted with divine power. Set effect. 3/3. Plus 100 agility. Plus 100 willpower. Plus 100 intelligence. Megara's ring. Irene's set 1/3. Soul armament. Magic DEF, 820. 1 plus 100 intelligence. 2 plus 25% mana regeneration. 3 plus 10% mana to be used only on offensive magic. A special armor from the hands of craftsman Smith enchanted with divine power. Set effect, collapse. Chapter 299. Soul armaments, 2. These 3 had been a no-brainer as their effects were understandable from the short description in the enchantment catalog. They also aligned with his goal to reach the usage requirement of the Helm of Hades. The others were often too vague or did not necessarily seem fit to be used on armor. As he kept looking through them one by one and tried to understand the sigils, he noticed a tab that had not been there the last time. A completely new list of enchantments opened when he selected it. It didn't take long for him to understand what was going on. Unlike before, when the locked enchantments were blacked out, he could now see all the enchantments he would be able to acquire during the craftsman rank and the corresponding level to unlock them. As one would expect from the Chthonian enchantments which were associated with the underworld, some of them were based on the hellish punishments. For example, Menoitio's punishment or Pirithous' punishment. Their effects seemed to correspond with the destiny that waited for them in the underworld or the way they died. There were still a few blacked out enchantments that Seth guessed could only be unlocked when he ranked up to Master in Enchantment. For now, he could look through the whole list of available enchantments he could get in the future. At level 2 he could unlock enchantments like Blessing of Hecate which increased intelligence and magic damage, or Blessing of Hades which could boost his luck. Level 3 was okay, but level 4 held some great goodies like Blessing of Pyriphlegethon which seemed to increase fire damage and affinity. A similar enchantment was Fire of Phlegethon, but this was a weapon enchantment. Seth checked his skills. With some surprise, he found that the 4 soul armaments had actually increased his enchantment to 70% proficiency. Divine enchantments were a lot more powerful than he expected. If he could make just a few more, he could unlock those on level 2, too. There were 2 more enchantments he could use, that were fit for gear. Blessing of Persephone. The queen of the underworld has an eye for beauty and art. Her blessing will bring charm and shape. And the other was Blessing of Charon. Charon spends his days ferrying the souls across the Styx. He has not much, but his blessing will make you fit to be a ferryman like him. Seth inferred that the first would increase his personality. As for the second, it sounded like a passive power-up, but he wasn't too sure. He decided to make an ornate necklace for Persephone's blessing. He had a déjà vu when he started engraving the sigil of the queen. It was the same as when he made the Helm of Hades. He could feel a presence looking over his shoulder. It just wasn't the serious and heavy pressure, but something softer. Like a sweet smell with a mischievous smile. As he cut the last grooves of the sigil, he could actually feel a pair of soft hands touch his shoulder. A breath touched his ear and an amused but sly female voice spoke to him. Only this once. It's beautiful and I appreciate that you will wear it so close to your very soul. But I prefer something that is seen by others so everyone can appreciate the beauty. A soft breeze passed through the room and Seth had finished the pendant. It felt like a hallucination until he saw the item's description. Persephone's necklace, weakened. Mag DEF, 76. 1 plus 40 personality. A soul necklace created by craftsman Smith with the half-hearted blessing of a goddess. The presence had been Hades' wife herself. His heart started pumping. He looked at all the enchantments that started with blessing of. Would each of them summon a god or divine being to look over his shoulder? Another matter was the obvious difference in strength. This was a weakened blessing but it was more than the Fury set did without any strengthening. And this was weakened because Persephone didn't like it being a soul armament. Where he had needed 10 plus medium-sized souls to get the Furies to their current strength, he only needed to spend 5 for Persephone's necklace. Persephone's necklace, weakened. Mag DEF, 386. 1 plus 100 personality. 2 others find you slightly more agreeable and tend to get less angry around you. 3 you will look more appealing to others. A special necklace created by craftsman Smith with the half-hearted blessing of a goddess. Although the latter 2 options were kind of vague, they were nothing bad and Seth was satisfied with this for now. The necklace had brought his proficiency to between 80 and 90%. The next item could already bring the level up. He had struggled so much, but it became so easy with these divine enchantments. Was this how champions felt? No, not really. Seth knew that champions had it even better. But he couldn't complain, he was very well off compared to most others. He didn't bother looking at the daytime. He ate and drank something and focused his attention on the next item. He would gain leave too. No matter what. Since he didn't know what exactly the blessing of Karen would do, he chose to put it on something small like a bangle. Most effects were fitting for accessories like this, it just wasn't that he wanted to end up with something like faster rowing on a pair of trousers. He also chose a bangle in the shape of a strip of metal because of the look of the sigil. The sigil resembled a skiff or a boat. It would look really good on the bangle. Not that it mattered, as only Seth could see the soul armament he wore. Again, as he engraved the sigil there appeared a presence in the room. But nothing else happened. It only stood there and watched Seth working on its insignia and vanished when he finished inscribing it. Karen's physique. Mag DEF, 76. 120% resistance to diseases. 210% poison resistance. A special bangle created by craftsman Smith with the stoic approval of a divine being. Seth was stumped. He had not thought it would be flat resistances. These were not like those on his usual items where the result was based on your original base stat. These were directly added to his status like the resistance gains through skills like poison resistance. He immediately started to strengthening the bangle. 100% disease and poison resistance were worth a lot in his book. Somewhere else. A ravishingly beautiful young woman with dark hair entered the cinema dimension. Several of the present figures ogled her curves revealed by her tight-fitting but elegant outfit as she walked past the rows of seats to the VIP space. With a big sigh, she inelegantly flopped down on the seat beside the big seriously-looking god with a thick black beard. She sat leisurely at his side as her hand touched his arm lovingly. "Hattie, I just visited your champion," she chuckled. "Do you want to know why?" she teased. Hades liked to play the big cold ice block but she knew he was actually very caring. It was the perfect chance to tease him a little in front of his friends. "Oh, why did you?" Hades asked with a small smile in his eyes. "He asked for my blessing." "He asked for mine first. His craftsmanship is quite good, but he is still inexperienced. He almost lost it when I pranked him a little," she bragged. Persephone just finished speaking when she noticed the smiles on the faces of Hephaestus and others around. "What?" Hades coughed a little and looked over to his wife. "We already knew what happened." "What?" she asked shocked. "It was Liv." He answered and pointed at the big screen with a small smile. "And you let me keep talking." "Mina," she punched the humongous god in the shoulder and turned her back to him pouting. Her ears had turned a scarlet red in embarrassment. "Ah. Purse. Don't be like that, I am sorry, okay." It was the first time his stoic mask crumbled as Hades had a hard time handling his wife's whims. Held back laughs and light chuckles filled the room and even the ruler of the underworld's face became slightly red. Are you really? Why yes. I am. I will forgive you. And you guys better stop chuckling or I tell your wives where you have been hiding. Dead silence filled the room. Only the quiet crunching of the system god who kept eating popcorn could be heard. Chapter 300. Unique. Seth was dismayed. His dream of 100% resistance to disease and poison was gone. He should have guessed it as it mentioned a limit. Karen's physique. He had just infused 5 souls when resistance to disease stopped growing, but there was hope, as another effect appeared. Resistance to decay. Seth kept infusing up to 10 souls when all values stopped growing and did not budge even when he infused another soul. Karen's physique. Mag DEF, 860. 160% resistance to diseases. 250% poison resistance. 320% resistance to decay. A bangle created by craftsman Smith with the stoic approval of a divine being. Although he was slightly disappointed, he was still happy about this. These were some of the most annoying debuffs not just in games. Being poisoned, whether by a skill or by a beast's venom, was very painful in real life. It wasn't just some dot where you watched the HP bar tick down slowly, but true pain. A feeling like acid pumping through your veins and actively corrode your body. Together with the resistances he had gained from food and skill, he now had 70% poison resistance and 82% disease resistance. It didn't just mean that weaker poisons and diseases had little chance to work on him, but effective poisons would also be less harmful. In all the chaos he had almost forgotten to check his skill. Had he missed the level up notification in his joy? No, because he had not reached enchantment LV2, yet. The proficiency bar was still a tiny, almost imperceivable, sliver away from the 100% mark. What else was he supposed to do now? He thought for a moment when Puffles suddenly said. Why don't you just enchant one of the items you already made? That way you can even see whether these behave the same way as the other enchantments did. That's not a bad idea for once. Haha, yes. When your pea-brain is stuck, don't wait to ask the great me for the advice. Wait. Hey, did you imply I ever had bad ideas? Seth gave the caterpillar the silent treatment as he brought out the item of his test. It was the chainmail shirt made of bones of Seth. It was a failure. He was right that the many thousands of effects would get in each other's way, but they also made it impossible to add any more effects, not even with soul infusion. He added a small badge on the chest of the chainmail to engrave the sigil. Something like this normally didn't work with ordinary enchantment, but Seth relied on the weird feature that the sigil would grow on its own. The enchantment he chose was Ice of Kosaitos, as he was sure to never use that one for any of his own equipment. Unlike the blessings, there was no presence this time. The moment Seth finished the engraving, the shirt's rings were covered in tiny engraving and exuded a terrifying cold, and he had to let the chainmail fall to the ground to not get cold damage. Ding! Your skill enchantment LV.1 has become enchantment LV.2. Kosaitos' chain shirt. Unique. Physical DEF 900. Mag DEF 300. Durability, 5000. 1/300 true ice damage on touch. 250 true ice damage per second in a radius of 5 m. 365% chance to cause indiscriminate slow in a radius of 10 m. 4 PR/%5, OV0 and R.S. A hazardous piece of armor created by the cooperation of craftsmen Seth and Cerberus. The scrambled effects of the chainmail were still there but had been overpowered, but it was now more or less a cursed item. Still, it helped Seth affirm something important. The divine enchantments would not erase the previous effects of the items. A big weight fell off his heart. This meant he could use them on items without fearing to lose the material's effects. And now he had another set of enchantments to choose from. The easiest to understand was the Blessing of Sticks. Blessing of Sticks. Ever since her champion Achilles wreaked havoc on the battlefield, it was coveted by many heroes. Though she never blessed anyone like her half-brother ever again. Wasn't Achilles invincible or something? So, it's defense, I guess? He thought to himself. Seth chose to make bracers for the Blessing of Sticks. He imitated a pair of tight-fitting leather bracers that could be tightened. They went well with the bangle. The sigil of Sticks resembled a tight knot, and as Seth engraved it onto the right bracer, he felt a wise gaze resting on his shoulders. Satisfaction mixed into this feeling as Seth finished the sigil, and a net of tight ropes and chains engraved itself all over the bracers. Styx's Guard. Mag DEF 90. 1+50 defense. A special armor created by craftsman Smith and blessed by a divine being. Just as he had suspected. Seth added 5 medium-sized souls as he did with Persephone's necklace to see what would happen. Styx's Guard. Mag DEF 90. 1 plus 250 defense. 2 plus 25 endurance. 3 plus 5% defense when blocking. A special armor created by craftsman Smith and blessed by a divine being. This growth was surprisingly good. Seth went right ahead and infused a big soul to see if there were limits. Styx's Guard. Mag DEF 960. 1 plus 500 defense. 2 plus 75 endurance. 3 plus 15% defense when blocking. A special armor created by craftsman Smith and blessed by a divine being. When Seth added another medium-sized soul, everything increased a little, but the amount had gotten less. He added another 4. Endurance stopped growing at 100 and the additional defense at 20% when blocking. The defense kept increasing, but Seth judged that this was enough for now. There were still more enchantments. Things turned foggy before his eyes and he managed to fall on his bed before he lost consciousness. It seemed that he had worked a lot longer than he had expected. How long did I sleep? A few hours. You are really pushing it. It's as if you don't feel the time when working on your gear. Seth could hear some worry swing within her voice in his head. He rubbed his temples. She was right. He drank way too little and it seemed like the enchantments took longer than he perceived. What day is it? It's the evening of the 3rd day, Puffles answered. He wasn't boastful this time and his tone was more blaming. It might be wrong, but Seth was happy that the two cared about him that much. I'm sorry, I will take better care of myself. He still had 3 days until those bastards returned. There were still some things to do. Seth had another 2 enchantments he wanted to turn into soul armaments. The other enchantments gave him more inspiration for actual items instead of making soul armaments out of them. He could use them to finish some of his items he had left unfinished before. Although the little bit of sleep he had gotten helped, he was still exhausted. He would have loved a break, but he knew that he could not afford one. If he managed to finish everything on the 5th day, he would have a full day to collect information before his disappearance would become known. First things first, to finish his soul gear for now he chose Hands of the Hecatonkires and Craft of Uknos. Seth guesses that at least one of them would give him dexterity. He knew too little about these myths to make a good guess. Fortunately, he didn't need to worry too much as he started off with medium-sized souls, so he would find out their effects before paying too high a price. Seth used the first one on a pair of pauldrons in the look of smooth leather that somewhat fit the ancient breastplate's design. The sigil resembled some kind of octopus. He couldn't really make sense of it. Maybe there was none. He was glad that there was no presence on these, as those had quite the impact on his nerves. When he finished the sigil, the pauldrons were covered in a pattern of reiteration imaged. Were these arms? Hecatonkires shoulders. Mag DEF 76. 1 plus 30 strength. A special armor created by craftsman Smith and enchanted with divine power. With 9 medium souls, the additional strength became 100, but there were no other effects. Maybe there were more effects if he kept strengthening it, but he did not really want to experiment on it right now. The craft of Uknos resembled a rope with a moth on one end and a pair of hands on the other. Seth was uneducated on who Uknos was, so he couldn't make sense of the sigil. The description was also not very helpful. Craft of Uknos. Tap into Uknos' most trained craft. What was he supposed to know from that? Like before with Karen's blessing, he decided to make a bangle. He thought the sigil could look quite good when the hands and mouth met at one point. Also, symmetry. After engraving, the bangle was covered in a floral pattern like grass or straw. As he thought, it granted a boost of 30 dexterity. In the same way, as before, it took about 10 souls for the boost to reach 100. As just like the pauldrons, there was no other effect for now. Uknos hands. Mag DEF 740. 1 plus 100 dexterity. A special armor created by craftsman Smith and enchanted with divine power. Seth felt a little bummed out with these two. They were great, but compared to what he had seen so far, they felt a little bland. On the other hand, they had not felt as taxing. He looked at the window, and the night was still dark. So not to further worry his 2 guests in his head, Seth took a break. He ate and drank from the food in his inventory and took some time to just lay down and relax.